He provided for the village. He repaired their roofs and dug wells for 3 years straight. Yet they tied him up and dragged him into the forest, a place from which no one returns. For what? For an empty slot above his head instead of a class. In the world of Valgrund, class decides everything. Born a warrior? Hold a sword. Born a mage? Here's a book. But born with an empty slot in the system? Get a rag and a bucket. Aric didn't even get that. He was dumped at the village smithy, wrapped in a gray rag. The blacksmith Brond took in the baby not out of pity. He needed hands. By the age of 5, the boy was hauling coal. By 7, he was blowing the bellows. By 10, he was fixing everything that broke in the village. But the class never came. Every spring, the children would place their palms on the stone of awakening, and the system would light up a line for them. Warrior, hunter, healer. Aric approached the stone 3 times. At 7, at 10, at 13. The stone remained silent.
The line above his head stayed empty. The crowd first giggled, then roared with laughter. By the time he was 15, they by name. "Hey, empty, fix the fence! Hey, empty, clean out the ditch!" He patched roofs, sharpened knives, dug wells, and worked for food, because empty wasn't paid. And then Brond died. His son kicked Aric out onto the street that very day. No home, no workshop, not a single person to stand up for him. For 3 years, the guy slept in a shed on the outskirts and took on any dirty job. And then the crop failed. The fields dried up, the wells ran dry, the livestock wasted away, and the village headman, Varn, gathered the villagers in the square. A big man with a red face and angry eyes, he loved simple solutions. And at the edge of the world, there's always only one simple solution. Find someone to blame. Varn barked that the crop failure wasn't an accident, that someone had cast a curse, that the system hadn't left one of them without a class for no reason. An empty line is a sign, and he pointed his finger at Aric. The crowd roared with relief. The culprit had been found. There he stood, skinny, quiet, without a family or a protector, the perfect scapegoat. Aric shouted that he had repaired their homes, dug wells, and plowed from dawn till dusk. They didn't listen. 2 hunters twisted his arms behind his back. The rope cut into his wrists until they bled. They dragged him through the entire village to the eastern path, the one that led to the forbidden forest. No one looked away. The women simply took their children back into their homes. At the edge of the forest, the trees stood like a wall, black, wet, humming. Shadows stirred between the trunks. The hunter untied his legs, shoved him in the back, and Aric collapsed to his knees in the mud. "Go straight. If you come back, we'll kill you on the spot." He stood up. He looked back. Smoke rising from the chimneys. The fences he'd repaired. The well he dug for 3 days under the sun. Everything was foreign. It had always been foreign. He stepped into the forest. For the first 100 steps, the path was still visible. Then the underbrush closed in. Branches lashed his face. Roots clung to his legs. With his hands bound, he didn't even close his eyes. An hour, maybe 2. The light faded. The tree canopies wove together above so thickly that even in the daytime, twilight reigned here. The sounds of the village died away, but others awoke. A crackling to the left, the scraping of claws against bark to the right, a low growl ahead. Aric froze. His heart was pounding. His hands went numb. He began rubbing the knot against the bark. The wet, slippery bark wouldn't give. He rubbed his wrists raw until the rope softened and loosened. He yanked. He tore the skin but pulled his hand free. His hands were free. He grabbed a fist-sized rock and a branch fragment as long as his forearm. That was all he had weapons. Against the forbidden forest, it was getting dark fast. Aric squeezed into a hollow between the roots of an old oak. He pressed his back against the trunk, stone in his right hand, stick in his left. He waits. Night fell all at once, pitch black. The rustling grew louder. Something heavy was pushing through the bushes 100 paces away. Then silence again. Then a crack, closer.
Aric held his breath. His eyes were useless. He listened. A crunch, a crunch. Heavy, wet footsteps. The smell hit him first. Rottenness and sourness right in his face, like the breath of a corpse. And then he saw the eyes. Two yellow fires 2 meters above him. They don't blink. They're staring at him. The forest devourer. People in the village used to whisper about them. A creature the size of a bull. 6 paws. Bony armor. A maw a third of its body. One of these could wipe out a squad of 5 silver-ranked fighters. The devourer roared. The ground shook. Every cell screamed to run. But there was nowhere to run. Darkness. A foreign forest. Hands covered in blood. A rock and a stick. The beast took a step closer. 6 paws dug into the mud. The plates glistened with moisture. Its mouth opened slightly, teeth in 3 rows. It lunged. Aric rolled to the right on pure instinct. The devourer slammed into an oak tree. The trunk cracked. Aric leaped up. He hurled a stone at its armor. It bounced off like a wall. Useless. The creature spun around, quick for its size. A paw whistled past. Claws ripped open his side. The pain was sharp and burning. Aric fell, rolled back. In his hand, a stick with a sharp split end. The devourer loomed overhead. Its jaws gaped wide. A stench. Teeth in his palm from the face. Aric strikes, blindly, from bottom to top. The sharp end enters softly. The creature roared. It jerked. The stick juts out of the eye socket. The right yellow flame went out. The devourer slammed its head down. Paws crushed the ground. Aric clung to the stick with both hands. He presses down. He drives it in. It screams in pain and terror. Black, hot blood splashes in his face. The creature collapses. It twitches, scratches with its paws. It falls silent. Aric lies beside it. His hands are shaking. His side is burning. His own blood and the creature's. He had killed the forest devourer. With a rock and a stick. A skinny kid with no class had taken down a creature that kills experienced fighters. And then the world flashed. A line lit up before his eyes. Golden. The letters formed slowly, as if the system were deliberating. And then they stood firm. Hidden class awakened. Class. Summoner. Ability. Summon any object. Aric reread it over and over. Not a sword, not fire, not a shield. Any object. He lay in the darkness beside the dead monster, bleeding out, shivering. And for the first time in his life, he smiled. The morning light filtered through the treetops in dim patches. Aric lay on his back. The wound on his side burned. Blood had dried into a crust on his shirt. His hands were swollen and aching from rope burns. The devourer's carcass lay nearby. In the daylight, the creature looked even more terrifying. A 3-meter-long armored body, 6 paws as thick as logs, bone plates on its back covered in moss and mud. A broken branch jutted from its eye socket. Aric sat up. His head was spinning. He hadn't eaten in a day and a half. The last time, they'd tossed him a stale flatbread before leading him out to the forest. He looked at the golden line that was still flickering in the corner of his vision. Summoner. Summon any object. He thought of bread. A plain loaf of rye. Warm. Just like the one the blacksmith's wife used to bake. He pictured it clearly. The crust. The crumb. The smell. A flash. A warm heaviness in his palm. He looked down. A loaf of bread lay in his hand. Real. Warm. Smelling of rye and yeast. Aric took a bite. Chewed slowly. Swallowed. The taste was real. The bread was real. He ate the whole loaf. Then he sat for a minute just staring at his palms. Out of nothing. Out of thin air. From a single thought. He thought of a knife. A simple one. with a wooden handle and an iron blade, just like the one he'd used hundreds of times to cut ropes in the village. A flash. The knife lay on the ground in front of him. He picked it up, turned it over. Good balance. The blade was sharp, real steel. He thought of a bandage. A strip of clean cloth appeared in his hand. Aric washed the wound on his side with water from a puddle. He wrapped it with the bandage, tightened it. The pain subsided. He stood up, staggered, steadied himself, looked around. The forest around him was dense and gloomy. Giant trees, trunks 3 arms' widths thick. Undergrowth of prickly bushes and ferns as tall as a man. Moss on the rocks, mushrooms on the roots. Rustling sounds from all sides. The forbidden forest lived its own life, and Aric was a stranger here. But a stranger with a knife, and with bread, and with a class he knew absolutely nothing about. He spent the first day scouting. He walked cautiously, stepped quietly, knife in hand. He found a stream 200 paces from the battlefield. The water was clear, cold. The bank was rocky. Nearby was a clearing, small, 30 paces across. A gap in the canopy, sunlight. A good spot. He would stop here. Aric sat down by the stream and began to think. The call of any object, any. What did that mean? He pictured an axe, a carpenter's, with an oak handle. A flash, an axe. He pictured a coil of rope, a flash, rope. He pictured 10 iron nails, a flash, a handful of nails in his palm. Each summoning was met with a slight chill in his chest, as if something were draining away, mana. He didn't know the exact amount, but he felt that after 10 summons, it had become a little harder to. Small items cost little. Bread, a knife, nails, almost nothing. The axe took more. Aric remembered this. There is a limit, so he needs to think about what to summon and when. He got to work. Summoned a saw, felled a thin tree, sawed it into logs. He whittled the branches with the axe, summoned more nails, more rope. By noon, he was drenched in sweat and gasping for breath, but the wall frame stood. 4 posts, crossbeams, the foundation. The work was familiar. His hands remembered. He had repaired walls and roofs in the village so many times that he could build with his eyes closed. There was one difference. Before, he had to search for materials, beg for them, steal scraps. Now he summoned them. A plank, a flash, a beam, a flash, door hinges, a flash. By the evening of the first day, a wall stood. One, a bit crooked, but a wall. Aric sat in front of it, chewing the summoned bread, drinking water from the stream, and thinking that for the first time in his life, he was building for himself, not for someone else's house, not for someone else's roof, for himself. The night passed uneasily. He heard growling in the darkness. Something was prowling around the clearing, but it didn't come closer. Maybe the smell of the dead devourer scared it off. Or maybe he just got lucky. On the morning of the second day, he continued. Summoned more boards. He summoned a hammer, a good one, heavy, with an iron head and an ash handle. He hammered until his ears rang. The second wall, the third. By evening, 4 walls stood around him. No roof, no floor, but 4 walls. The third day, the roof. He summoned long planks and roof tiles. The tiles were expensive in mana. Each tile was fired clay with a complex shape. He felt the mana draining faster. After the 30th tile, he stopped. His head was buzzing. He felt sick. He'd reached his limit. He finished the roof with bark and branches. It wasn't pretty, but it kept out the rain. Day 4. The door. He summoned hinges and a lock, a simple iron bolt. He hung the door. He turned the bolt. Click. For the first time in his life, he stood inside a house with the door locked. In his own house. 4 walls, a roof, a door, a lock. On the fifth day, he reinforced the walls from the outside. He dug pointed stakes into the ground around the perimeter. He had a dozen stakes ready, sharp, sturdy. He drove them into the ground at an angle. Any creature that charged straight ahead would run into them. It wouldn't kill a large monster, but it would slow it down. On the sixth day, he made a bed of planks inside and summoned a straw-stuffed mattress. The mattress cost surprisingly little mana. A simple thing, fabric and straw. He lay down on the mattress, soft, warm. Back in the village, he had slept on bare planks in the barn. On the seventh day, he sat down at the threshold of the conjured hut. A stream lay before him. Behind him was the house. In his hand was a mug of hot herbal tea he'd found by the water. He thought about how a week ago he'd been abandoned in this forest to die, without food, without weapons, without hope, bound. He looked at his hands. The rope marks were beginning to heal. The calluses on his palms were old, familiar. The hands of a builder, the hands of a repairman, hands that had spent their whole life doing other people's work and had done their own for the first time. The village had cast him out with nothing, and now he had everything, literally everything. All that remained was to build something bigger than a hut around it. At that moment, Aric heard a rustling in the bushes. He jumped to his feet, a knife in his right hand. He drew a second knife to his left. The bushes parted. A girl stepped out onto the clearing, young, dirty. Her dress was in tatters. Her hair was tangled. Her bare feet were scraped. She walked unsteadily. She swayed. Her eyes were glassy with exhaustion. She saw Aric. She saw the hut. She saw the stakes around it. She stopped. She said she was no enemy, that she had come from the town of Morvale, that she had been accused of poisoning a noblewoman and sentenced to exile in the Forbidden Forest. She was a herbalist. She treated people with decoctions and poultices. The noblewoman had died of a fever, not from poisoning, but the noblewoman's physician had accused the herbalist to shift the blame away from himself. The trial lasted 1 day. The sentence was exile. For 3 days, she wandered through the forest. She ate roots. She drank from puddles. 3 times she hid from monsters. Each time she thought she would die. Her name was Senna. She was 20 years old. Aric looked at her, barefoot, hungry, banished for someone else's fault. Just like him, exactly like him. He put away his knives, summoned a bowl of hot porridge, plain, oatmeal, with some honey added. He handed it to her. Senna looked at the bowl, then at him, then back at the bowl. She asked where it came from. Aric said it was a long story, and that she could eat first, and then he'd tell her. Senna took the bowl, sat right on the ground, ate quickly, burned her mouth, and ate. She finished. She looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears. She said she'd spent 3 days thinking she'd die in this forest, that every rustle seemed like the last, that she'd already decided to lie down and not get up. And then she saw smoke rising from his hut. Aric summoned a second mattress. He placed it inside the hut. He said it was safe here, that there were stakes all around, that he had killed the devourer right here. Senna didn't believe him. Then she saw the creature's carcass 50 paces from the hut. It had already begun to rot. She looked at him a different way. No one had ever looked at him like that before, without pity, without mockery, with something resembling hope. Aric said that tomorrow he would expand the hut, that there was a lot of work to do, and that if she was a herbalist, he could summon a mortar and pestle, a cauldron, and an herb dryer for her. Senna nodded. For the first time in 3 days, she smiled. Aric returned to the threshold. He sat down. He looked at the forest. 1 outcast. Then 2. Maybe there would be more. The Forbidden Forest. A place of death. But today there was a hut standing in it, with a roof, with a door, with a lock, with 2 people the world had cast out, and with porridge that appeared out of thin air. This was the beginning. Senna turned out to be more useful than Aric could have expected. She knew plants. First thing in the morning, she walked around the clearing and the bank of the stream. She returned with a bundle of herbs. She said that half were suitable for decoctions, but one plant with yellow leaves was poisonous and had to be pulled out by the roots. Aric pulled it out. Then Senna examined the wound on his side. She removed the bandage. She shook her head. She said the edges were inflamed, and if left untreated, an infection would set in. Aric summoned a mortar and pestle for her. He summoned a clean cloth. He summoned a small pot. Senna ground some leaves and bark into a paste. She applied it to the wound. She bandaged it. 2 hours later, the heat in his side subsided. Within a day, the inflammation had gone down. A herbalist. A real herbalist, not a charlatan, as the court in Morvale had decided. Aric realized one thing. He could summon objects, but he couldn't know everything. He wasn't a healer. He didn't know which plants healed and which killed. He needed people with knowledge. He worked. Every day from dawn to dusk. He expanded the hut. He added a second room for Senna. He summoned a table and 2 stools. He summoned a larger cauldron for cooking. He built a shed by the stream for drying herbs. Senna dried the bundles and hung them on the walls. The hut began to smell of mint and thyme instead of dampness and rot. On the 10th day in the forest, he encountered a creature, not a devourer, smaller, about the size of a large dog, 6 eyes, a mouth full of needles instead of teeth, fast, agile. Aric heard a rustle and turned around. The creature leaped from a branch. He summoned a shield. Round, wooden, with an iron rim. The shield appeared in his hand a split second before the blow. The creature slammed into the shield. Aric held his ground. He pushed the creature back. He summoned a spear, short, with a broad tip. He struck. The creature twitched and went still. This was his second fight, easier than the first, because now he had weapons, any weapon he could imagine. On the 12th day, he began building a fence around the clearing, not just stakes, a real stockade. He summoned logs, sharpened them, dug them in. Senna helped. She was stronger than she looked, thin but sinewy, used to working with her hands. Together, they enclosed the clearing in 3 days, a stockade 1.5 feet high, with a gate made of thick planks, with a bolt. On the 15th day, more people arrived, 3 of them, a man and 2 children. A boy of about 10 and a girl of about 7. The man's Bram. He was a farmer from a village on the edge of human lands. A different village, not Bramhall. His village had been burned down by soldiers because of some dispute between lords. Bram grabbed the children and ran. He ran as far as his eyes could see. He ended up at the edge of the forbidden forest. He decided the forest wasn't any worse than the ashes. He walked for 2 days. He found a stockade and smoke. The children hadn't eaten in a day and a half. Aric looked at them. The boy was holding his sister's hand. The girl was silent. Her eyes were wide, empty. Those are the eyes of someone who has seen their home burn. Aric conjured a table, a large one, for 5. He conjured bread, hot, a whole loaf. He conjured cheese, milk in a jug, cooked meat on a plate, fruit, bowls, spoons. The table was filled with food in 30 seconds. The children stared without blinking. Aric told them to eat, that no one here was going hungry anymore. Bram sat down. He sat the children down. They ate silently and quickly. The girl started crying, not out of grief, because the bread was warm and delicious, and whoever had simply given it to her with no strings attached. Aric stepped away. He stood by the stockade. He looked into the forest. Senna approached. She said they needed more houses. Aric nodded. The next day, he began building a second house, for Bram and the children. On the 18th day, 2 more arrived. A one-legged hunter who had been discharged from the human army, and an old woman banished from the city for debts. On the 20th day, 4 more, miners from the northern mines. They had fled from the overseers. Aric built. House after house. He summoned logs and planks and nails and hinges and locks. Each new house cost mana. Every evening he went to bed exhausted, but in the morning his mana was restored, and he built again. By the end of the first month, there were 7 houses in the clearing. The stockade had grown to 2 meters high. 23 people lived inside, all outcasts, all refugees, all those whom the world had cast aside. Senna took charge of the herb supplies and medical care. Bram knew farming and began clearing a plot behind the stockade for a vegetable garden. A one-legged hunter named Darren taught the young ones how to set snares and butcher game. An old woman named Marta cooked for everyone. Aric gathered supplies: pots, buckets, shovels, pickaxes, axes, saws, nails, cloth for clothing, blankets. Every day, whoever asked for something, and Aric would summon it. He became the storekeeper, the supplier, a one-man factory. But he noticed problems. Mana isn't infinite. If he summons materials for the construction site in the morning, by evening he doesn't have enough strength left to summon weapons for the guard. If he spends mana on food, there's none left for tools. Well, it's all about balance, and you have to understand what you're summoning and how much it costs. Aric started keeping track. He summoned a notebook and a pen. He wrote down every item and his sense of the mana spent. A single loaf of bread, almost nothing. An iron knife, a little more. A wooden shield with an iron rim, noticeable. 10 oak planks, noticeable. A full set of armor. He hadn't tried it yet, but he suspected it would be expensive. He couldn't summon large objects yet. A cart. He tried. He imagined a simple peasant cart, with wheels, with sides. A flash. The cart appeared, and Aric collapsed to his knees. His head was splitting. Nausea rose in his throat. He sat on the ground for 5 minutes, coming to his senses. A cart is expensive. He remembered that. He also noticed something else. Simple things he knew well cost less. The knife he had sharpened 1,000 times in bronze smithy. The plank he had planed hundreds of times. The nail he had forged dozens of times. He could picture these things clearly and precisely, and they cost less. But the things he had seen only briefly or knew only vaguely cost more. A roof tile cost more than a board, not because clay is more expensive than wood, but because Aric had a poor understanding of the firing process. Knowledge equals access. The better he understood something, the cheaper the cost. This changed everything. It meant he needed to learn, to understand how things worked. Every new piece of knowledge was a new, cheap item in his catalog. Aric told Senna about this. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said he wasn't just a summoner, he was an engineer, and that he needed to take apart every object he found, to study it, to memorize, and then his catalog would become infinite. Aric nodded. An engineer. He'd never thought of himself that way. He thought of himself as a guy who fixed other people's fences. But Senna was right. A fence is a structure. A roof is a structure. A lock is a mechanism. A cart is a mechanism. Every object is a set of parts and principles. Know them, and you can summon anything. On the 30th day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. It wasn't just another family of refugees coming out of the forest. A pack came out of the forest. 12 creatures, similar to the ones he had killed before, smaller than the devourer, but in a pack. Fast, vicious, hungry. They came at night. Darren, the sentry standing on a makeshift watchtower, saw eyes in the darkness. Many eyes. He screamed. The settlement awoke. Aric ran out of the house. He summoned a spear. He summoned a shield. He summoned 5 more spears and handed them out to those who could wield a weapon. Bram took a spear. 2 miners took a spear each. Senna stood behind them with a knife. 12 people at the palisade against 12 creatures. The creatures charged the gate. The planks creaked. Aric summoned an iron beam and propped up the gate. 1 creature leaped over the palisade. Bram met it with his spear. He struck crookedly, but hit. The creature screeched. The second miner finished it off. Another one climbed over. And another. Aric summoned more. Spears, shields, beams to reinforce the walls. Mana drained away like water. A buzzing started in his head. The battle lasted 20 minutes. They killed 7 creatures. The rest retreated. One miner was wounded, a deep laceration on his shoulder. Senna treated it, applied a compress, bandaged it. In the morning, Aric stood at the gate and looked at the creatures' corpses. The palisade held, but barely. The gate was cracked. 2 stakes were broken. It was the settlement's first real battle. 23 people, half of whom had never held a weapon, against a pack of monsters. They survived. But Aric realized that a stockade and spears were not protection. They were a delay. He needed walls, real ones, stone, or at least made of thick logs. He needed traps, pits with stakes, tripwires, warning systems. He needed more people who knew how to fight. And he needed more mana. Or a better understanding of things so he could summon more cheaply. He opened his notebook. He wrote down his mana loss per battle. He wrote down that each spear cost this much, each shield cost this much, each log cost that much. He did the math. If a pack twice as large arrived, he wouldn't hold out. His mana would run out before the enemies did. Aric closed the notebook. He looked at the settlement. 7 houses, a palisade, 23 people. A month ago, there was nothing here. A month ago, he lay bound at the edge of the forest. There is progress, but it's too slow. The forest won't wait. On the 32nd day, a creature Aric hadn't expected emerged from the forest. Small, green, with long ears and huge yellow eyes. A goblin. Barely waist-high to Aric, skinny to the point of transparency, ribs sticking out through the skin, clad in scraps of some unidentifiable hide. In its hand, it clutched a stick sharpened on a stone. The sentry, Darren, saw it first and grabbed his spear. He shouted that a creature was crawling out of the forest. 3 men ran out to the palisade. Bram raised his spear. The goblin stood at the edge of the woods, 10 paces from the gate. He didn't move. He just stared. His eyes were huge and wet. He didn't attack. He stood there, looking at the settlement as if it were something incomprehensible. Aric stepped out to the gate. He looked at the goblin. The creature was pitiful, exhausted. The sharpened stick trembled in his hand. This isn't a predator. This is a refugee, just like everyone here. Aric told them to lower their spears. Bram looked at him as if he were mad. He said it was a goblin and that goblins steal and slaughter people in their sleep. Aric replied that people also cast other people out into the forest to die, and that he saw no difference. He stepped outside the gate, alone, unarmed. The goblin backed away. The stick rose higher. Aric stopped 5 paces away. He crouched down, summoned a piece of boiled meat into his palm, held it out. The goblin looked at the meat, then at Aric, then at the meat, sniffed. He swallowed, slowly reached out his hand, grabbed the meat, jumped back 3 steps, sank his teeth into it, chewed with his eyes closed. That's how someone who hasn't eaten in a long time eats. Aric summoned another piece. He placed it on the ground, and a third. The goblin ate it all. Then he sat down on the ground. He laid his stick down beside him. He looked up at Aric. He introduced himself. The name sounded like a series of clicks and whistles. Aric asked him to repeat it. The goblin repeated it. Aric said he would call him Pook if he didn't mind. The goblin blinked. He shrugged his shoulders. Apparently, he didn't mind. An hour later, Pook was sitting inside the settlement, eating his 3rd bowl of porridge. Bram kept his distance. Bram's children, on the other hand, came closer. The girl handed Pook a mug of water. Pook took the mug with both hands. He drank in small sips. He looked at the girl. Then he said something quietly in broken human. The word was short. Thank you. In the evening, Aric sat with Pook by the fire. The goblin spoke poorly but clearly. It turned out he wasn't wild. The goblins in the Forbidden Forest had their own tribes. Small ones, scattered. Always at war with each other and with monsters. Pook had been banished from his tribe. For what? For taking things apart. Pook found the wreckage of weapons and tools left behind by dead adventurers in the forest. Rusty swords, broken crossbows, pieces of armor. The other goblins saw it as junk. Pook saw mechanisms. He took every object apart, studied how things were fastened, how a spring presses against a bracket, how a gear meshes with another gear. The tribe's chieftain decided that Pook was wasting time on nonsense instead of hunting. He banished him. Aric listened, and he felt as if something had clicked inside him. A mechanic. A goblin mechanic. A creature who understands how things work. Knowledge equals access. And Pook is a walking encyclopedia of mechanisms. In the morning, Aric asked Pook to show him what he knew. Pook led him to a hiding place in the woods half a kilometer from the settlement. Beneath the roots of a tree was a pit covered with moss. Inside lay dozens of objects. Gears, springs, fragments of locks, a piece of a crossbow mechanism, part of a trap, half an oil lamp. Pook pulled the items out one by one. He explained in broken language, using gestures. This thing here, it presses here, then it releases. And this one flies out. You get it. Aric understood. He looked at the crossbow mechanism, the trigger guard, the bowstring, the guide. He had never held a crossbow in his hands. He'd seen them from a distance when soldiers marched through the village. But now Pook was showing him how it worked, piece by piece. Aric closed his eyes. He pictured the crossbow in its entirety, the stock, the shoulders, the bowstring, the trigger mechanism, the bolt guide. Everything Pook had shown him. He summoned it. A flash. The crossbow appeared in his hands, heavy, brand new, shiny. Mana was drained, but less than Aric had expected, because now he understood how the crossbow worked. Pook stared at the crossbow, then at Aric. His eyes grew even wider. He pointed at the crossbow, then at the air, then at Aric. He asked how. Aric said it was his class, that he summoned things. Pook was silent for a minute. Then he said one word. More. Aric grinned. More. They returned to the settlement, and Aric spent the whole day with Pook. The goblin showed him thing after thing, explained mechanism after mechanism. A door hinge, a simple lever, a pulley system, a ratchet mechanism, a water wheel. Aric soaked it all in. Every new piece of knowledge unlocked a new item in his catalog. Every new item cost less because he understood it from the inside. By evening, he had conjured a pulley system for lifting heavy loads. He conjured a system of ropes and pulleys. He conjured a simple well gate. Each time, mana was used more sparingly than the day before. Pook was a treasure trove, a living encyclopedia, and he was happy. For the first time, his passion for taking things apart had proven useful. For the first time, someone listened to his explanations instead of kicking him. On the 35th day, Aric began building a wall. Not a palisade, a wall. A double row of logs with earth and stones packed between them, 3 meters high. He summoned the logs in bundles, 10 at a time. Mana was spent evenly. The logs were standard, identical. He knew them perfectly. A cheap summon. People worked. They dug a trench for the foundation. They set the logs in place. They filled the gap. They tamped it down. Aric summoned tools for everyone. Shovels, pickaxes, wheelbarrows. By the 40th day, the wall enclosed the clearing on 3 sides. On the 4th side was a stream. There, Aric set up a grate made of thick iron rods. Water flows through. The creature won't get through. The gate is new, made of 3 layers of oak planks with iron hinges and a bolt. On the wall, every 20 paces, a platform for a sentry. Darren set up the posts. 5 men on the night shift, 5 on the day shift. Aric issued a crossbow to each man. 10 crossbows in a single day. His mana was depleted, but not critically. He now knew crossbows well, thanks to Pook. Cheap. By the 45th day, the settlement had changed. It was no longer a cluster of huts behind a fence. It was a village, a wall, a gate, watchtowers, crossbowmen, 12 houses, 41 people. The garden behind the wall began to yield its first greens. Senna set up an infirmary in a separate house. Marta managed the kitchen and food distribution. Bram oversaw the farming. Darren commanded the defense. Pook tinkered with mechanisms and taught Aric every day. And Aric was building, learning, and writing everything down in a notebook. On the 46th day, Aric stood on the wall and looked at the forest. Senna climbed up to him. She said that people had started calling this place by different names. Some call it the refuge, others the new home, still others simply the wall. Aric asked what she thought. Senna paused. Then she said that if he was building not a village but a future, this place should have a real name. Aric thought. He looked at the forest, at the wall, at the houses below, at the people. He said one word. Valford. A ford in the valley, a place they passed through. Senna nodded. Valford. A good name for a place that welcomes everyone. That same evening, Aric gathered all the residents in the square in front of the kitchen. 41 people. Men, women, children. One goblin. He said that this place was now called Valford, that everyone who came here came not as a guest, but as a resident. That there were 3 rules here. First, no one is turned away. Second, everyone works. Third, everyone protects one another. Simple rules. People listened. Some nodded. Some stared at the ground. Bram raised his hand and asked who was in charge here. Aric said that for now it was him, because he was the only one who could summon walls and weapons, but that it wasn't forever, that when Valford grew big enough, they would elect a council. And for now, he would build, and they would live. The people dispersed. Pook approached Aric, tugged at his sleeve, said he'd show him something interesting tomorrow. He'd found the wreckage of something strange in the forest, something metallic, with gears he'd never seen before. Aric nodded. Tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. A month ago, tomorrow meant only one thing. Survive one more day. Now, tomorrow meant something else. Build one more wall. Learn one more mechanism, take in one more outcast. Aric climbed down from the wall. He walked past the houses, past the kitchen where Marta was washing pots, past the infirmary where a light was on, past Pook's workshop, cluttered with debris and parts. He went into his house, lay down on the mattress, closed his eyes. In the morning he would get up and build. Like yesterday, like tomorrow, like every day until Valford became a place from which no one. On the 47th day, Pook led Aric deep into the forest. They walked for about an hour. The forest grew darker. The trees grew thicker. The moss on the trunks grew denser. The sounds changed. The birds fell silent. Even the insects fell silent. Pook moved with confidence. He knew these paths. He had lived in the forest his whole life. Finally, he stopped by a fallen tree. The trunk, 5 hands wide, lay across the ravine. The roots had torn a layer of soil a meter thick from the ground. There was a pit beneath the roots. Pook jumped down. Aric followed him. An object lay in the pit. Metal, the size of a barrel, covered in mud and moss. But beneath the layer of earth, a strange alloy glinted. Not iron, not bronze, something else. Silvery with a bluish sheen. Pook cleared the dirt from one side. He showed Aric. Gears. But not like those in a crossbow or a lock. These were perfectly smooth. The teeth were even, as if carved by a beam of light. Between the gears were grooves filled with something like hardened resin, and symbols. Symbols were engraved. Not human, not elven as far as Aric could tell. Something entirely different. Pook said he found it 3 days ago. He was digging a burrow for shelter and stumbled upon it. He tried to take it apart but couldn't. The metal wouldn't give. Not a single tool left a scratch. Aric crouched down beside it. He touched the casing. Cold, smooth, slightly vibrating, as if something was working inside, very slowly, on the verge of being felt. He ran his finger over the symbols and felt a response, not in his fingers, inside, where the mana resided, a slight jolt, as if his summoner class had responded to touching this object. Aric pulled his hand away. His heart began to race. This wasn't an ordinary mechanism. It was something connected to the system, or to summoning. He didn't know exactly what, but he could feel it. They pulled the object out of the pit, heavy. They barely dragged it back to the settlement. They put it in Pook's workshop. Aric told them not to tell anyone yet. They needed to figure it out first. Pook nodded. He didn't really talk to the others much anyway. The next day, Aric worked on the wall. The southern section was weaker than the rest. The ground was soft. They were sinking. He pulled out the ones that had sunk, summoned new ones, hammered them in deeper, filled the gaps with stones, tamped it down. By noon, the southern section stood firm. Then Vesna arrived. Aric didn't immediately realize who was standing before him. The girl emerged from the forest silently. She simply appeared at the gate like a shadow. The guards nearly sounded the alarm. She was tall, slender. Her skin was pale with a slight lilac tint. Her ears were long and pointed. Her hair was black, reaching down to her waist. Her eyes were dark violet, a dark elf. The guards froze. 2 crossbowmen raised their weapons. No one in Valford had ever seen an elf in the flesh. They'd only heard stories. The forest empire of the elves was one of the 3 great powers. They possessed ancient magic. They lived for thousands of years. They despised humans. And they certainly didn't wander alone through the forbidden forest. Aric stepped out to the gate. He looked at her. She looked at him. Calmly. Without fear. Without aggression. She said in clear human language that she had come unarmed, that she posed no threat, that she had heard about the settlement in the forest and had come to see it. Aric asked where she was from. Vesna said she was from the Forest Empire, from the Inner Circle, from the city of Aelindra. She was a mage and a scholar. She studied the system. She asked questions that the Council of Elders did not like. Why the system assigns classes? Where mana comes from? What lies beyond the system's borders? Who created it? These questions were considered unacceptable. The system is a given, not a subject of study. Vesna did not stop. She found old texts in the Empire's archives. The texts mentioned the Forbidden Forest, and something beneath it, something ancient, connected to the system. The council learned of her research. She was tried for heresy. The verdict? Exile. She was lucky. Usually, people were killed for such questions. But she had a patron among the elders who commuted her sentence to exile. She wandered through the forest for 2 months, alone, surviving on magic, minor spells, shields, flashes of fire, traps for small game. Then she heard a knocking, a distant rhythmic knocking, hammers, saws, voices. She followed the sound. She found Valford. Aric listened. 2 months alone in the Forbidden Forest. And she survived. This elf wasn't just a scholar. She was strong. He asked what she wanted. Vesna said she wanted to stay, and that in exchange, she could give him knowledge about the 3 realms, their armies, their magic, their weaknesses. And the fact that the Council of Elders knows about the Forbidden Forest, but is hiding it from the rest. Aric thought for a moment. A dark elf in a human settlement. It's a risk. The people here are all from the kingdom of men. They grew up on stories of wars with the elves, on hatred, on fear. He looked at his men. Bram looked wary. Darren gripped his spear. The 2 crossbowmen hadn't lowered their weapons. Aric turned to them. He said that the first law of Valford states that no one is turned away, that this law makes no distinction between races, that if the elf came unarmed and asks for refuge, then Valford grants refuge. Bram opened his mouth to object. Aric looked at him. He asked if Bram had forgotten how he himself had stood at these gates with hungry children. Bram closed his mouth. He lowered his eyes. Vesna entered. They gave her a house, the last one built, small, but with a roof and a door. That evening, she came to Aric. She said she had to tell him something important, right now. They sat down at his table. Vesna spoke quietly. She said that the three powers know more about the Forbidden Forest than they let on. The forest isn't just dangerous thicket full of monsters. The forest is an anomaly, a place where the boundary between the world of Valgrund and whatever else is thin. Not all the monsters in the forest are local. Some come from somewhere else, from other layers of reality, or from other worlds. Ancient elven texts called this the Rift. The three powers have used the forest as a buffer for centuries precisely for this reason. Not because there are monsters there, but because the rift is there, and the rift is connected to the system. Vesna said that the summoner class wasn't a coincidence, that the ancient texts mention something similar, the ability to pull things through the rift, from other worlds. The objects Aric summons, they aren't created out of nothing, they come from somewhere. Aric was silent. He looked at his hands. Bread, knives, boards, crossbows, walls, everything he had summoned over these past weeks. All of it had come from somewhere, from another world. He thought of the loaf of bread, his first summoning. Somewhere in another world, a loaf of bread had vanished from a table. Vesna said that wasn't all. The texts mentioned an entity, an old one, an ancient one, connected to the rift. The elves called it the Hollow Caller. It was this very entity that was the reason why the three powers were afraid to enter the forest. Not monsters. Monsters can be killed. The Hollow Caller cannot be killed, because no one knew what it was. A voice, a presence, a power, something living deep within the forest, right at its center, where the rift is thinnest. Vesna asked if Aric had sensed anything strange in the forest, something beyond the monsters in the trees. Aric recalled a vibration in the strange mechanism beneath the roots, the response of his mana to touching it. He said yes, that he had found a metal object with symbols in the forest, and that his mana had reacted to the touch. Vesna paled. The lilac tint of her skin turned almost white. She asked to see it. Aric led her to Pook's workshop. Pook was sleeping in the corner, curled up on a pile of rags. The mechanism stood in the middle. Vesna approached. She didn't touch it. She looked at it, for a long time. Then she crouched down. She ran her hand over the surface without touching it. Aric saw the air between her palm and the metal tremble slightly. Magic. She was reading something. Vesna stood up. She said it was a beacon, a navigational beacon, very old, older than the three powers. Older than the system itself, perhaps. It marks the point of the rift. Like an anchor. These symbols. She pointed to the engraving. It's not a language. It's coordinates. A location. A direction. A depth. This beacon points somewhere. Deep into the forest. Aric asked where. Vesna said she didn't know. But if there's one beacon, there must be others. And that they all lead to the center, to the source of the rift, to the hollow call. Aric stood in the silence of the workshop. Pook was snoring in the corner. A strange mechanism vibrated quietly. Somewhere outside, hammers were pounding. People were building, living, eating summoned food. They slept in summoned houses, unaware that every object that appeared out of thin air came from another world. And that deep in the forest, somewhere at its very center, something older than the three realms lay in wait. Something that might have given Aric his class. He closed the workshop door. He told Vesna that for now, this was between them. People didn't need to know. They already lived in the Forbidden Forest among monsters. There was no need to add the ancient mystery of the universe to that. Vesna nodded. She agreed. But she said that sooner or later, they would have to figure it out. Because if the three powers find out that a summoner has appeared in the Forbidden Forest, one who can pull things through the rift, they won't just sit idly by. Aric returned to his home. He lay down. He stared at the ceiling. A summoner. A class that didn't exist on Valgrund. A class connected to the rift between worlds. To an ancient entity deep of the depths of the forest, with beacons leading to the center. He closed his eyes. A month ago, he was a nobody. A nobody. A guy without a class. Now he is a city builder. The leader of over 40 people and one goblin. The holder of a class feared by 3 empires. And perhaps the only person on the continent capable of reaching the secret of the system. In the morning, he would get up and build, as always. But now he knew he wasn't just building a city. He was building atop something ancient. And that ancient thing knew of him. 2 months had passed since Aric entered the Forbidden Forest. Valford was growing. Every week, new people arrived. Families, lonesomes, vagabonds, deserters, those whom the world had cast out and forgotten. By the 60th day, the population had surpassed 100. By the 70th, 150. Aric built, every day, without stopping. New houses, new sections of the wall, new workshops. He summoned materials in batches, 20 planks at a time, 40 nails, 10 beams. Mana was being used more evenly. He had learned to gauge his reserves more accurately. A full reservoir in the morning, a third by evening, replenished overnight. And every day, the reservoir was a little larger than yesterday. His class was growing, slowly, but growing. Vesna had explained it. The system was designed so that using a class strengthened it. A mage who cast spells every day increased his mana pool. A warrior who fought every day increased his strength. A summoner who summoned every day increased the scope of what he could summon. Aric summoned every day, a lot, and his limit kept shifting. 3 months ago, he collapsed from exhaustion after summoning a single cart. Now he could summon a cart and 20 more planks after that. Progress, slow but steady. Vesna became his right-hand woman in matters unrelated to construction. She knew the politics of the 3 powers. She knew the balance of power. She knew who was at war with whom and why. Every evening they sat at the table and she would tell him. The kingdom of men, the most populous power, 200,000 soldiers, knights in heavy armor, siege engines, trebuchets, battering rams, fortresses on the borders. King Aldous had ruled for 30 years, a pragmatist, tough, not evil, but not kind either. For him, only the interests of the kingdom mattered. Everything else was a hindrance. The forest empire of the elves, the oldest of the 3. Magic of a level humans could not attain. Barriers, illusions, battle spells capable of scorching entire fields. But the elves were few. 50,000 warriors, perhaps 60, quality over quantity. Empress Elindris ruled from a city nestled among the crowns of ancient trees. Arrogant. She considered humans to be short-lived savages. She hated demons with religious fervor. The demon abyss, chaos, hordes, hundreds of species of demonic creatures, from minor imps to colossal lords. Lord Mazareth united them with an iron will and fear. Without him, the abyss would have fallen apart into 1,000 warring clans. Mazareth was ancient, older than any living elf. He remembered the times before the system, or so he claimed. The 3 powers had always been at war. Not a total war, border skirmishes, raids, sieges of individual fortresses. A full-scale war broke out once every 50 years and ended with the exhaustion of all sides. The Forbidden Forest between them served as a buffer, a neutral zone, a place where no one ventured, until Aric built a city there. Vesna said the humans would be the first to find out. They were the closest. Their scouts patrolled the edge of the forest regularly. Sooner or later, someone would see the smoke, or hear the noise, or stumble upon the tracks, and then they'd report it to the king. Aric asked how much time they had. Vesna said she estimated 3 to 4 months, maybe 6 months if they were lucky. Aric nodded. 6 months. They had to make it in time. On the 75th day, Corin arrived. Aric remembered that day because Corin changed everything about Valford's defenses. He emerged from the forest alone, tall, broad-shouldered, 35 years old, his face scarred, his armor battered and rusty but still on him, a sword at his belt, a shield on his back. He walked steadily,
Calmly, not like a refugee, like a soldier.
The guards raised their crossbows. Corin stopped, raised his hands, said he had come with no hostile intentions, that he was looking for a place to stay, that he had heard from vagabonds that there was a settlement in the forest that took in everyone. Aric came out, looked at him, asked who he was. Corin answered plainly, a former knight of the Kingdom of Men, captain of the 3rd Company of the Border Garrison. He deserted 8 months ago. For what? For refusing to carry out an order. The Lord Commander ordered his company to wipe out a village on the border with the demonic lands. The village was sheltering a family of demon defectors, a mother and 3 children, low-ranking demons, harmless. They had fled from their own lords. Corin refused. He told the Lord Commander he would not slaughter children, neither human nor demon. The Lord Commander flew into a rage, called him a traitor, declared him a deserter. Corin left at night.
Took his sword and shield, nothing else.
He walked for 8 months, from town to town. He didn't linger anywhere. They're looking for the deserter. A bounty has been put on his head. 50 gold pieces. Not much for a knight, but enough for every innkeeper to glance sideways and do the math. In the end, he went into the forbidden forest, because they won't look for him there. Aric listened. A knight, a real knight with combat experience, a company commander, someone who knows how to build defenses, how to command men in battle, how to train a militia, everything Aric didn't know how to do. He let Corin in, gave him a home, fed him, and the next day he took him to the wall and told him to point out what was wrong with the defenses. Corin inspected the wall. He walked the entire perimeter. He climbed every watchtower. He inspected the gates. He looked at the crossbowmen. In the evening, he sat down at the table with Aric and Vesna, and he began to speak.
The wall is good for defending against beasts. It won't hold against an army. It's too thin. There's no moat. There's no counterscarp. The towers are too low. The view is poor. The crossbowmen aren't trained. They stand crooked. They aim slowly. Half of them won't be able to hit a target from 20 paces. There's only one gate. If the enemy focuses their attack on the gate, they'll break through. We need an emergency exit, an underground passage or a hidden gate in the wall. There's no rapid response unit. If there's a breach in one section, it'll all be over by the time the guards run over from the other side. Aric was taking notes. The notebook was filling up. List of problems, list of solutions. Corin wasn't just criticizing. He was making suggestions. A moat. 3 meters wide, 2 meters deep. Fill it with water from the stream or leave it dry with stakes at the bottom. Raise the wall. Add a battle parapet, a platform for archers with loopholes. Fortify the gate. A second row of gates behind the first. A deadly corridor between them. Anyone who breaks through the first will fall into a trap. Aric listened and visualized every detail Corin described. The moat, the stakes, the parapet, the loopholes, double gates. He could summon all of this. It was just a matter of mana and time. He asked Corin how long it would take to train the men. Corin said you couldn't turn militiamen into knights, but you could make disciplined fighters in 3 months, if they trained every day. Drill in the morning, crossbow practice in the afternoon, close combat in the evening, spear and shield, not a sword. A spear is simpler. A wall of spears will stop anything except heavy cavalry. Aric said they would have as many spears as they wanted, and shields, and crossbows, and bolts. Corin looked at him for a long time, asked where from. Aric summoned a spear, right at the table, out of thin air. He placed it on the table. Corin looked at the spear, then at Aric. Then back at the spear. He said that in 20 years of service, he'd never seen anything like it. Then he said that with an endless supply, he could build an army in 6 months. Not a large one, but one that would leave any attacker swimming in blood. Aric held out his hand. Corin shook it. From that day on, Corin commanded the defense. Every morning, 30 men and 12 women would gather on the parade ground in front of the gates. Corin drove them to the point of exhaustion. Form up, shield to shield, spears forward, step, stop, step, stop, crossbow, load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire, faster, even faster. People groaned, muscles ached, legs gave out. But Corin wouldn't let up. He didn't shout, he didn't hit, he didn't insult. He just stood there and watched with his calm gray eyes. And the men trained. Because this man had refused to slaughter children just to follow an order. And they trusted him. Aric was digging a trench. He called for shovels for everyone who wasn't training. Children, old men, everyone dug. The earth and the moat grew. 3 meters wide, 2 meters deep, Aric drove stakes into the bottom, sharp, iron, summoned in bundles of 20. The bottom of the moat became a deadly trap. He built up the wall at night. When his mana had regenerated during the day, he would go to the wall and summon new rows of logs on top of the old ones, row after row. By the 100th day, the wall had risen to 4 meters. With a parapet, with loopholes every 3 paces, with platforms for crossbowmen. He completely rebuilt the gates, double gates, the first set made of 3 layers of oak, the second set made of iron. Between them, a corridor 5 paces wide and 10 paces long. The corridor walls had loopholes. Anyone who broke through the first gate would find themselves in a stone bag under crossfire. Corin looked at the structure and smiled for the first time in ages. He said it was more vicious than anything in the royal fortresses. On the 110th day, Valford's population reached 200 people, 24 houses, 3 streets, a square with a well, a kitchen, an infirmary, Pook's workshop, which had expanded to 3 rooms, a warehouse, barracks for the militia, a training ground, a vegetable garden behind the wall, an enclosure for small game that they had learned to catch and raise. It was no longer a settlement. It was a small town. Senna managed the household. She distributed supplies. She oversaw the infirmary. She settled disputes among the residents. She did this calmly and firmly. People listened to her, not because they were afraid, because she was fair, and because everyone knew that Senna was the first to come to Aric, the first to believe. Every evening, Vesna reported to Aric what she had learned. She sent out magical probes beyond the forest's edge, thin threads of mana invisible to the naked eye. She listened to conversations at the edge of the woods. She caught snippets of rumors. People at the border were already talking about strange things, about smoke in the forbidden forest, about the sounds of construction, about someone living in a place from which no one returns. Rumors were spreading. Just rumors for now, but soon someone would go check it out. Aric knew. Time was running out. He picked up the pace, summoned more, built faster, learned from Pook every spare minute. The goblin showed him increasingly complex things. A lock mechanism, a drawbridge, a ballista. Pook had found the wreckage of a ballista in the forest. He took it apart. Explained to Aric how the torsion mechanism worked, how the cables twist, how the lever releases the scoop, how the projectile flies in an arc. Aric summoned a ballista, a full-scale one, a combat-ready one. Mana hit him like a fist. He held his ground, barely, but he held his ground. The ballista stood on the wall, huge, formidable. Valford's first serious siege weapon. Corin looked at it. He stroked the wood of the spoon, checked the tension, said he'd seen such things on the walls of the capital, and that summoning such a thing out of thin air was either a gift from the gods
or madness? Aric said it was more likely the latter. Corin smirked. The first and last joke Aric ever heard from him. On the 120th day, Aric stood on the wall. Corin, Vesna, Senna. Below, Pook was fiddling with yet another mechanism. Beyond the wall, a moat lined with stakes. The wall was 4 meters high, a ballista, 40 trained fighters with crossbows and spears, 200 men, a small town in the Forbidden Forest, a town that shouldn't exist. Aric looked east, toward where the kingdom of men lay beyond the forest. Somewhere out there was his village, Bramhall, where they had bound him and abandoned him. He no longer thought of revenge. There was nothing to avenge. The village was just a bunch of frightened people looking for someone to blame, like everyone else. As always, he was thinking of something else. That soon it wouldn't be frightened peasants coming from there. Soldiers would come from there. Knights, siege engines, the army of a power that possessed 200,000 swords. And he had 200 men and 1 ballista. Aric clenched his fist. Mana hummed inside him, full, restored, ready. He didn't yet know when they would come, but he knew he would be ready. The scouts arrived on the 140th day, 3 of them, light leather armor, short swords, bows, the emblem of the kingdom of men on their breastplates, a golden lion on a blue field. They emerged at the wall on the south side. One of the sentries noticed movement in the bushes and raised the alarm. Corin was on the wall within a minute. He looked down. 3 men stood at the edge of the moat, staring at the wall with expressions of utter bewilderment. They clearly hadn't expected to see a 4-meter-high wall with battlements and a ballista in the middle of the Forbidden Forest. One of them turned and ran back into the forest. 2 remained. They stood and watched. Then they left too, quickly, without looking back. Corin climbed down from the wall. He went to Aric. He said that the human scouts had found Valford, that the one who ran away first was a messenger. He's running to the nearest garrison right now. In 2 or 3 days, the report will reach the local lord. In a week, the border guard commander. In 2 weeks, King Aldous. And in 3 or 4 weeks, a detachment will be here. Not an army. First, a detachment. 100 men, maybe 2, to see what's going on. If the detachment doesn't return or returns with bad news, then the army will come. Aric nodded. A month. He had a month. He began working like a man possessed. He worked from dawn till dusk. The wall grew to 5 meters. A second row of battlements. 3 ballistas instead of 1. The moat was widened. In front of the moat, a strip of land studded with hidden stakes. The stakes were small, iron, sticking 3 centimeters out of the ground, invisible in the grass. Step on one and your foot is pierced right through. Corin called it cruel. Aric replied that war is a cruel thing. Corin didn't argue. He knew that better than Aric. Aric reinforced the double gates once more. A 3rd layer of planks on the outer ones, iron strips crisscrossing them, a bolt made of a solid iron bar as thick as a hand. Above the gates, a platform with 3 arrow slits pointing downward. The deadly corridor had become even more vicious. Pook suggested an idea. Traps with mechanical triggers. A rope stretched across the path. A foot catches it. The lever is triggered. A log flies from the tree, or a dozen arrows from a hidden box. Aric called out the details. Pook assembled them. The goblin worked quickly. His long, nimble fingers turned gears and wound springs with the precision of a watchmaker. In 2 weeks, they set 30 traps on the approaches to Valford. From the south, from the west, from the east. The north is covered by a swamp and thick windfall. Cavalry won't get through there. Corin trained the men twice as intensely. Drill in the morning until noon. Archery after lunch. Night maneuvers in the evening. He divided the fighters into 3 groups of 10. The first squad on the wall. Crossbowmen. Their job was to shoot and keep the enemy from getting close to the wall. The second squad was at the gate, spearmen with shields. If the gate was breached, they would meet the enemy with a wall of spears. The third squad was the reserve, to plug the gaps, to rush to wherever there was a breach. 12 fighters in reserve wasn't enough, but Aric couldn't call up more men, only weapons. Vesna suggested something else. She's a mage. Her magic wasn't combat magic in the full sense. She couldn't hurl fireballs or summon lightning, but she knew how to cast barriers, magical shields, thin, transparent, but capable of deflecting an arrow or slowing a sword strike. And illusions. She could create the appearance of what wasn't there. Fake fighters on the wall, fake towers, movement in the forest behind the attackers, disorientation, fear. The enemy doesn't know how many there really are. They see 1,000, but in reality, there are 200. Aric approved. Every advantage counts. He continued to learn from Pook. Every new mechanism is a new item in the catalog. Pook explained how traps worked. Aric conjured traps. Pook explained the principle of a drawbridge. Aric conjured chains and winches. Pook dug out of his stash a fragment of a mechanism he called a self-firing crossbow. A multi-shot crossbow, a magazine holding 5 bolts, a reloading lever. One man could fire 5 bolts in the time it took a regular crossbowman to reload a single one. Aric studied the mechanism for 3 days, took it apart, put it back together, took it apart again, understood every detail. Then he summoned it. The multi-shot crossbow appeared in his hands, heavier than usual, more complex, more expensive in mana, but 5 shots in the time it takes to fire one is an advantage worth any amount of mana. He summoned 20 such crossbows. His mana was completely drained. He lay there all evening, unable to get up, but 20 multi-shot crossbows stood in the armory. Corin took one, examined it, loaded it, fired 5 times, 5 bolts into the target in 12 seconds. He looked at Aric, said that with such a weapon, 20 archers could work like 100. Aric said they would have an endless supply of bolts. Corin shook his head, said that wasn't fair, then added that in war, fairness kills. On the 160th day, they arrived, a detachment from the kingdom of men. Aric stood on the back and counted. Not 100, not 200, 500 men, 2 cavalry squadrons, 3 infantry companies, a supply train, banners, a golden lion on a blue field. At the head rode a knight in full plate armor, visor raised, face stern, young, about 25. Clearly a member of the nobility. Corin stood nearby. He watched. He said he recognized the banner. It was Lord Varen's detachment, the border commander. Not the best, but not the worst either. 500 men is a serious force for a reconnaissance in force. Someone in command decided not to take any chances and sent enough to crush any settlement. The detachment stopped 300 paces from the wall, out of crossbow range. A knight rode forward with a white flag, a negotiator. Aric climbed down from the wall. He went out through the gate, alone. Corin wanted to go with him. Aric said no. If a battle broke out, Corin was needed on the wall. He was the only one who could command the defense. Aric walked along the strip between the moat and the forest, past hidden stakes, past camouflaged traps. He knew where everyone was. He stopped 50 paces from the wall. The envoy rode up, young, nervous. He stared at the wall behind Aric with undisguised surprise. He said that Lord Varen, commander of His Majesty King Aldis's detachment, demanded the immediate surrender of the illegal settlement. All residents must come out unarmed and surrender. The settlement would be demolished. The residents would be taken to the nearest town for trial. Aric listened, calmly. Then he said that Valford would not surrender, that the residents of Valford were not criminals, but refugees and exiles with nowhere else to go. That Valford stood on the land of the Forbidden Forest, which belonged to none of the 3 powers, and that if Lord Varen wanted to enter, Let him try. The messenger turned pale. He turned his horse around. He rode off. An hour of silence. Aric returned behind the wall. He went upstairs. The men stood at their posts. Spearmen at the gates, crossbowmen in the embrasures, reserves in the courtyard. Senna was in the infirmary, preparing bandages and potions. The children and those unable to fight were in the cellar beneath the kitchen. Vesna was on the wall next to Aric. Her hands were raised, eyes closed. She was weaving illusions. Figures appeared on the wall, dozens of figures, silhouettes of warriors in armor, archers, spearmen, 200 real ones and another 300 phantom ones. The wall looked bristling with weapons. Aric summoned bolts for the crossbows, in bundles, 20 at a time. He laid them out along the parapet, 40 bolts within reach for each archer, and he could summon more, and more, and more, endlessly, as long as he had mana. Lord Varen attacked head-on, no tricks. 3 companies of infantry advanced on the wall. The cavalry remained in the rear. The first wave, 150 men, shields raised, swords in their scabbards, spears forward. They marched in even formation, disciplined, professional, and they fell into the first trap. Hidden stakes in the grass. The front row screamed. Men were falling, clutching their legs. Iron spikes pierced their boots and feet. The formation broke. Sergeants were yelling. The second row went around the fallen men. They ran into a rope barrier. A log broke loose from its fastening. It struck the formation from the side. 4 men were knocked down. The third trap, a hidden pit. 3 men fell in. Stakes at the bottom. Screams. The infantry didn't reach the ditch. They retreated. They regrouped. Lord Varen sent the cavalry around. 2 squadrons split up. They flanked the enemy. The left squadron ran into a strip of traps. The horses screamed. Riders fell. The right squadron made it through more easily, but ran into the ditch. The horses couldn't jump 3 meters. The riders dismounted. They crawled across the ditch and came under fire. 20 multi-shot crossbows opened fire. 5 bolts in 12 seconds. 20 archers. 100 bolts in 12 seconds. Then another 100, and more. The bolts never ran out. Aric stood behind the line of archers, calling out bolts one after another. His hands moved automatically. Mana flowed steadily. He could feel the reserve. Enough for an hour of this fire, maybe more. Varen's men were falling into the ditch and beyond it. Shields offered no protection against such a barrage. They hadn't expected this. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Lord Varen sounded the retreat. The unit retreated 300 paces. The wounded lay in the field between the forest and the moat. They were moaning, screaming. Not a single casualty on this side of the wall. Aric looked at the wounded. Then he turned to Corin. He said they needed to send men to gather the wounded enemies. Corin looked at him as if he were mad. Aric repeated himself. Gather the wounded. Bring them to the infirmary. Bandage them. Corin said this was war. Aric replied that this was Valford, and that the third law states that everyone protects one another, even those who were trying to kill them a minute ago. 12 fighters went outside the wall. They picked up 11 wounded from Varen's unit, brought them to the infirmary. Senna treated the wounds, bandaged them, gave them pain-relieving potions. One of the wounded human soldiers looked at her. Then he asked why. Why were they treating their enemies? Senna replied that there were no enemies here. There are only the wounded. Lord Varen stood 300 paces away, watching as his wounded were carried into the city he had come to destroy. That evening, he sent a second messenger. The messenger said that Lord Varen demanded the return of the prisoners. Aric went out. He said there were no prisoners. There were wounded people being treated. As soon as they were able to walk, they were free to go. No conditions. The messenger left. The night passed in silence. In the morning, Lord Varen broke camp and led his force eastward, toward human lands. Aric stood on the wall and watched as 500 men marched away through the forest. Corin stood beside him. He said that Varen would return, not alone, with an army. that he would report to the king about the city in the Forbidden Forest that couldn't be taken by 500 men, and that the king would send 5,000 or 10. Aric nodded. He knew. But today they had held their ground. 200 men against 500. Not a single casualty on their side. 11 enemy wounded in their infirmary. Valford's first victory. After Varen's retreat, Aric waited. He knew the silence was temporary. 2 months. Corin said that's how long it would take for Varen's report. The journey to the capital, the king's decision, the gathering of troops, and the march back. 2 months to prepare. The 6th month since Aric's expulsion from the village. Valford was changing every day. People were coming. After the battle with Varen, the news spread throughout the borderlands. A city in the Forbidden Forest? It takes everyone in? Food from thin air? Walls that cannot be breached? It sounded like a fairy tale. But the wounded Varen soldiers who had been sent home told the story. They were treated, fed, released without conditions. Each of the 11 told the same story. A skinny guy on a wall who summons things out of nothing. A city that cannot be taken by force. And laws. No one is turned away. Everyone works. Everyone protects one another. People flocked to Valford. Not by the dozens, by the day. Families with bundles. Artisans with tools. Landless farmers. Former soldiers who were tired of fighting for lords. In 2 months, the population tripled. 600 people. Aric was building. The 3rd ring of walls. The inner city and the outer city. New houses. New workshops. A smithy. A real smithy with a forge and an anvil. Summoned in its entirety in a single evening. His mana dropped to 0. Aric slept for 12 hours, but the smithy stood, and a blacksmith was found. A former apprentice from the city of Torin, young, 22 years old, skilled hands, a 3rd-rank blacksmith. He forged what Aric couldn't summon effectively: complex locks, custom fittings, armor tailored to a specific person. Summoned armor is standard, like a uniform, but the blacksmith tailors it to the figure. Pook worked with the blacksmith. They hit it off instantly. The goblin knew the mechanisms. The blacksmith knew the metal. Together, they created things that Aric could later summon, knowing their inner workings down to the smallest detail. Each joint effort made future summons cheaper. A chain reaction. Knowledge begets knowledge. Vesna brought alarming news. Her magical sensors had picked up snippets of conversation at the edge of the forest. King Aldous took a personal interest. Varen reported not to the border commander, but directly to the capital. The king convened a war council. A city in the Forbidden Forest on neutral territory is not a bandit camp. It is a political problem. If humans build a city on lands that the 3 powers consider a buffer zone, then the elves and demons will decide that humans are expanding, and they will strike first. Aric grasped the scale of it. This is not just a conflict with a single kingdom. This could turn into a war of all against all. Valford was at the center. He had gathered a council, Valford's first real council. 5 people sat at the table. Aric, Senna, Corin, Vesna. Pook was on a stool because a regular chair was too high for him. Aric said the human army would arrive in 6 to 8 weeks. A large one. Thousands. Corin said they needed to prepare a 3-ring defense. The outer ring, traps and barricades. The middle ring, a wall with a moat and crossbowmen. The inner ring, the citadel, the line of defense. Aric nodded. The citadel. He hadn't built anything out of stone yet. Wood is good against infantry. Against siege engines, wood burns. We need stone. He closed his eyes. He pictured a stone block, granite, hewn, 1 meter by half a meter. A flash. The block appeared on the table. Heavy. The table cracked. He could feel the mana draining away. 1 block. Just 1. But he needed hundreds, thousands, for the citadel walls. In terms of mana, that's a colossal expense. He opened his eyes, looked at the block, then at Pook, asked if it could be made cheaper. Pook came over, examined the block, tapped it, said that stone is a simple thing, but heavy. Mass is mana. The heavier the object, the more expensive it is. There's no way around it. But you can be clever. Don't build the walls out of solid stone. Build a wooden frame. Clad the outside with thin stone slabs. Fill the inside with dirt and gravel. It looks like a stone wall. It withstands impact like a stone wall. And it costs a third of the price. Aric smiled. Pook was a genius. Vesna brought up a second topic: diplomacy. Going to war with the human kingdom alone would be suicide. We need allies, or at least the neutrality of the other two powers. If the elves and demons see humans invading the Forbidden Forest, they might decide they need to control the forest themselves. And then 3 armies would come at once. But if Aric could convince at least one power that Valford wasn't a threat, but a buffer that benefited everyone, the situation would change. Aric asked how. Vesna said they needed to start with the demons. The demons are the farthest away. Their territory lies to the west, beyond the mountain range. They do not consider the Forbidden Forest their own. And Lord Mazareth is known for preferring deals over war. Not out of kindness, out of pragmatism. War costs resources. Deals bring resources. Aric nodded. But the demons are far away, and there's no one to send. Vesna said that for now, it's enough not to fight them, not to provoke them. If demon scouts find Valford, greet them politely. Show that the city isn't hostile. Senna brought up a third topic: food. Aric can conjure food, but 600 people is a massive drain on mana for food every day. If he spends mana on food, he doesn't spend it on walls and weapons. We need to become self-sufficient. There's a vegetable garden, but it's small. We need fields, real fields. Clear the land outside the walls. Sow grain. Raise livestock. In 6 months, Valford must be able to feed itself without summoning food. Aric agreed. He himself felt that summoning food for 600 people every day was draining a third of his mana. A third that could be spent on defense. The council meeting lasted until midnight. A decision was made. Corin would build the defenses. 3 rings. Vesna would work on diplomatic channels. Senna would organize agriculture and self-sufficiency. Pook would help Aric study and reduce the cost of summonses. Aric would build the citadel. 3 weeks. Aric worked 14 hours a day. In the morning, he summoned the wall frames. Wooden frames, thick, sturdy. People set them up in a circle. In the afternoon, he summoned stone slabs for cladding, thin but durable, granite, 10 at a time. Each batch was a tangible drain on his mana. After the 10th batch, his head spun. After the 15th, he felt sick. He stopped, waited, drank water, ate. His mana slowly crept back up. He continued. In the evening, the people filled the gaps between the frames and the cladding with earth and stones. They tamped it down. At night, Aric summoned iron brackets to reinforce the joints. By the end of the 3rd week, the citadel stood. A round tower 15 meters in diameter, 7 meters high, walls 1.5 meters thick, granite cladding on the outside, 3 floors inside. The lower level was a storage area. The middle floor was barracks. The top floor was a command post with a view in all directions. On the roof was a platform for ballistas. Corinne climbed onto the roof. He looked around. He could see far into the distance. The treetops stretched toward the horizon. To the south, where the forest thinned, one could make out the edge of the plain. Human lands. The army would come from there. Corinne said the citadel was good, but on its own, it wouldn't hold the city. The citadel was the last bastion, a place to retreat to when all was lost. And nothing could be lost. We had to hold the outer walls. Aric knew that. The outer walls were his job, every day, every evening, urging them to fortify, to reinforce. He stood on the citadel's roof, 600 men below, houses, streets, the square, a smithy with smoke rising, vegetable gardens beyond the wall, children running between the houses. Somewhere a hammer was striking. Somewhere, wood was being sawed. A city. A real city. His city. No, their city. That evening, a demon appeared at the gates of Valford. One. Small. Human-sized. Reddish skin. Short horns curving backward. Yellow eyes. A thin tail with a tuft at the end. Clad in a black cloak. Unarmed. The guards raised their crossbows. The demon raised his hands. In human speech, with a slight accent, he said he was a messenger, that Lord Mazareth had heard of the city and forest and had sent him to take a look. Aric stepped out onto the wall. He looked down. The messenger stood calmly. His hands were raised. His tail twitched. He was nervous. Aric recalled Vesna's words. Greet demons politely. Show that the city is not hostile. He ordered the crossbows to be lowered, to open the gates, to let the messenger in. Corin stood beside him, hand on his sword, but not threateningly, just in case. The messenger entered. He looked around. He looked at the walls, at the houses, at the people, at the ballista on the citadel, at Pook, who was sitting on a barrel and chewing an apple. The messenger's gaze lingered on Pook, then on Aric. He asked, in his accented human speech, why a goblin lived here. Aric said that anyone who comes without hostility lives here, of any race, of any origin. The envoy was silent. Then he said that Lord Mazareth would be interested to hear this. Aric showed him around the city. He showed him the walls, the smithy, the infirmary, the vegetable gardens. He didn't show him the inside of the citadel, nor did he show him Pook's workshop with the beacon. The envoy watched. He memorized. He didn't touch anything. In the evening, Aric fed him a summoned dinner. The messenger ate neatly. Then he asked how the food had appeared out of nothing. Aric said that was his class. The messenger said that Lord Mazareth would definitely want to speak in person. In the morning, the messenger left, polite, quiet. He vanished into the forest to the west. Vesna approached Aric. She said that this was both good and bad. Good because Mazareth wouldn't attack without negotiations. Bad because now 2 of the 3 powers knew about Valford. The elves would be next to find out. And the elves' reaction is unpredictable. Aric looked west, where the messenger had gone, then south from where the human army would come, then north, where the forest empire lay beyond hundreds of kilometers of forest. 3 sides, 3 threats, 1 city, 600 people. Him and 1 ability, to summon anything except peace. King Aldis's army appeared on the 210th day. 10,000 soldiers, 20 siege engines, 3,000 cavalry, a supply train a kilometer long. Aric stood on the citadel's roof and looked south. The trees at the edge of the forest had been felled. A clearing 100 paces wide had been cut through. A column was marching along it. Banners, thousands of banners, a golden lion on a blue field, and 1 banner at the very front. White with a golden crown, the royal one. Corin stood beside him. His face was stony. He said this wasn't a punitive expedition, it was a siege army, at full strength. The king had brought his best. Heavy cavalry, frontline infantry, siege engineers, trebuchets. This meant Aldis had no intention of negotiating. He intends to raze Valford to the ground and forget that anything was ever here. Vesna stood on the other side, pale. She said that among the banners there was one Corin couldn't see, a magical corps, battle mages, at least 15. She could sense their auras, powerful, fire, lightning, wind. Against 15 battle mages, her illusions and barriers won't last long. Aric nodded. 10,000 against his 800. Over 2 months of preparation, the population has grown even more. But of the 800, barely 250 are fighters. The rest are women, children, the elderly, and artisans. 250 fighters against 10,000. Hopeless, on paper. But paper doesn't know about the moat, about the 3 rings of walls, about the traps, about the multi-shot crossbows with endless bolts, about the ballistas on every tower, about the citadel with its 5-foot walls, about Aric, who can summon anything needed for defense from the air at any moment. Aldis's army set up camp 500 paces from the outer ring of traps. Tents stood in rows. Fires were lit. Smoke rose in columns. The smell of roasted meat reached the walls. 10,000 men were having dinner before they tore the small town apart. The next morning, a horseman rode forward. Not a messenger, the king himself. Aldis was a large man of 50, broad shoulders, a gray beard closely cropped. His armor was gilded, but not decorative, battle-hardened, with dents and scratches. This king had fought in battle himself. Beside him were 6 knights of his personal guard. Behind them, a standard-bearer. They stopped before the moat. Aldis looked at the wall, at the ballistas, at the figures on the parapet. Some were real, some were Vesna's illusions. The king couldn't have known that. He saw a wall bristling with weapons and men. Aldis shouted. His voice was deep and powerful. He was used to giving orders. He said he wanted to speak with whoever was in charge here. Aric came down. He stepped outside the gate. He stood on his side of the moat, across 3 meters of empty space with stakes at the bottom, face to face with the king. Aldis looked at him, a skinny guy, 19 years old, plain clothes, no armor, no weapon in his hands. He looks calm. Aldis asked who he was. Aric gave his name. Aldis asked where he was from. Aric said, from the village of Bramhall, on the edge of human lands. Aldis frowned. He asked if he was a knight or a lord. Aric said he was an orphan with no rank, a man the village had cast into the forbidden forest to die for someone else's crop failure. Aldis was silent for a few seconds. Then he said that didn't change anything, that a city within the forbidden forest violated the unspoken pact between the 3 powers, that the forest must remain a buffer, that if humans settled in the forest, the elves and demons would view it as expansion and strike. Not at Valford, at the kingdom of men. Aric listened. The argument was logical. Aldis wasn't stupid. He wasn't seeking revenge. He wasn't punishing anyone. He was protecting his realm from political repercussions. Aric replied. He said that Valford wasn't a human settlement. Humans and goblins lived here, and perhaps tomorrow demons or elves would arrive. Valford didn't belong to any of the 3 powers. It is a 4th party, independent. And if Aldis wants to prove to the elves and demons that humans are not expanding into the forest, then the best way is to recognize Valford as independent. A separate territory, not human, not elven, not demonic. A 4th. Aldis smirked, a harsh, cold smirk. He said it was too early for a boy with 800 ruffians to talk about independence on equal footing with a power that had 200,000 swords. Aric said that the boy had walls that Varen's squadron hadn't breached, and that the boy had something no king in Valgrund possessed. Aldis asked what. Aric raised his hand. He summoned a chair, an ordinary wooden chair, in the middle of the field, out of thin air. He set it on the ground, sat down, looked up at Aldis. Then he summoned a second chair, placed it on the other side of the moat. He said that if your majesty wished to continue the conversation, he was welcome to sit down. Aldis looked at the chairs, at the air from which they had appeared, at the young man's hands. The 6 knights behind him exchanged glances. Aldis did not sit down. He turned his horse around, rode back to camp. Aric remained sitting on the chair, alone, in the middle of the field, before an army of 10,000. Corin watched from the wall. He said quietly that Aric was either a madman or a genius, and that he hadn't decided yet. The assault began 3 hours later. Aldis didn't wait. The trebuchets lined up in a row, 8 of them, huge wooden structures with counterweights. The first volley arced through the air. Stones the size of barrels flew toward the walls. Impact! The wall shook. The stone facing cracked. The second stone struck to the right. The third flew over the wall and crashed into the roof of a house. The house collapsed. People screamed. Senna led the children into the citadel's cellars. Aric stood on the wall. He looked at the trebuchets, 8 of them, 400 paces away, out of range of the crossbows, out of range of the ballistae. They would methodically smash the walls with stones, and then the infantry would march over the rubble, a classic siege. Aric closed his eyes. He thought. He couldn't reach the trebuchets, but he could repair the walls faster than they were breaking them. A stone struck the wall, a crack. Aric summoned a stone slab. He pressed it against the crack, filled the gap. The wall was whole again. Another strike. Another crack. Another slab. Another whole wall. It had become a duel. 8 trebuchets were breaking down the wall. Aric was repairing it alone, stone by stone, slab by slab. Mana was flowing, fast, too fast. Stone slabs were expensive. 20 minutes, 30, 40. Aric felt his mana running dry. His head was buzzing. His hands were shaking. He needed another solution. He looked at Pook. The goblin was standing nearby. He was looking at the trebuchets. Aric asked if they could be disabled without getting close. Pook thought for a moment. Then he said one word. Oil. Aric didn't understand. Pook explained. The trebuchet is made of wood. Wood burns. But it was 400 paces away. He couldn't throw an arrow that far. But what if not an arrow? What if a barrel? The ballista on the citadel could hurl a projectile 500 paces. If the projectile was a clay pot filled with burning oil, it would shatter upon hitting the trebuchet, and the oil would ignite. Aric smiled. He summoned a clay pot. He summoned oil and poured it into the pot. He summoned a rag and plugged the neck. A homemade incendiary bomb. He carried it to the citadel's roof. The ballista stood ready. A crew of 3 waited. Corin adjusted the sights. The first pot flew off in an arc, a miss. It hit the ground 20 paces from the nearest trebuchet. The oil spilled. It caught fire, but it didn't reach the machine. Aric called for a second pot. Corin adjusted his aim. Fire. The pot struck the trebuchet's lever. It shattered. Oil splashed onto the wood. The fire flared up instantly. The trebuchet caught fire. The crew rushed to put it out. It was useless. The oil burned voraciously. Within 2 minutes, the machine was ablaze. Aric summoned the pots one after another. Corin aimed. 3 ballistas fired. The second trebuchet caught fire. The third. The fourth. The human soldiers tried to roll back the remaining ones, but the ballistas were taking them out. The 5th. The 6th. By the end of the hour, 7 of the 8 trebuchets were burning. They managed to roll back the last one. 1 out of 8. Black smoke hung like a wall. Aric sat on the citadel's roof. His mana was at a quarter. His hands were shaking. But the trebuchets were burning, and the wall stood. Aldous watched from the camp. His best siege weapons had been destroyed by clay pots of oil, fired from ballistas that this city shouldn't have had. Every pot had appeared out of thin air. Every crossbow bolt, too. Every stone for repairing the wall, too. This city wasn't playing by the rules. It had no supply train, no logistics, no weak link in the supply chain. Because the supply chain was a single man who drew everything needed from the void. In the evening, Aldous sent in the infantry, 3,000, in waves. The first wave, 1,000. Shields closed, formation tight. They passed through the trap zone. There were casualties, dozens, but not hundreds. 3,000 is not 500. The traps work only once. When the first wave passed, the traps were spent. The second wave walked over the bodies. The third followed them. The moat. 1,000 men jumped into the moat, stakes at the bottom, screams, but the rear ranks climbed over the front ones, a living bridge of bodies. Hooks flew at the wall, ropes, assault ladders. The crossbowmen fired. Multi-shot crossbows spat out bolts continuously.
Aric stood behind the line of shooters and called for bolts. A bundle, another bundle, more. He didn't count. Mana flowed, slowly, in a thin stream. He was conserving everything. Simple bolts, an iron tip on a wooden shaft, a cheap call to arms. He could drag this out for hours. Human infantry climbed the wall and fell back down. Corrin was in command. His voice sounded steady. No shouting, no panic. Reload, fire. Left flank spears to the parapet. Knock down the hooks. The spearmen met those who climbed over the parapet. A wall of spears. Whoever climbs over gets skewered. The battle lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of continuous assault. The human army retreated. Casualties at the wall. Hundreds wounded. Dozens killed. Valford lost 8 wounded. Not a single casualty. The wall held. The bolts didn't run out. Aric didn't fall. The second night, Aldous didn't storm the wall. He regrouped. In the morning, he sent in the mages. 15 battle mages lined up in a row. A simultaneous strike. A firestorm crashed into the wall. The temperature spiked. The wood inside the walls began to smoke. The stone cladding cracked from the heat. Vesna stood at the wall. Hands up. A barrier. A transparent shield rose before the wall. The fire struck the barrier. It spread out. Vesna was trembling. Sweat ran down her face. She was holding the barrier alone against 15 mages. She wouldn't last long. Aric understood. This had to stop. Not a battle, the war. He couldn't kill 10,000 people. He didn't want to. He was a builder, not a butcher. But he could make continuing the siege pointless. Aric closed his eyes. He gathered all his remaining mana, all of it, down to the last drop, and he summoned. He summoned continuously for 8 minutes. A wall, a new wall, not a repair of the old one, a new one, rising from the ground in front of the old wall. A wooden frame, stone-facing, double the thickness, 6 meters high, with towers every 30 paces, with battlements, with platforms for ballistas. The wall grew out of nothing before the eyes of the 10,000-strong army, block by block, section by section, as if invisible builders were working with 1,000 hands. Aldous' soldiers watched and recoiled. The mages ceased fire. They stood with their mouths agape. The wall had grown, closed into a ring, stood tall, new, whole, formidable. A double wall 6 meters high, in 1 minute, 8 minutes. Aric collapsed, mana 0, consciousness fading. The last thing he saw was Corrin's face as he caught him, and he heard silence. Absolute silence. 10,000 soldiers were silent. Because a fortress had risen out of thin air before them. Aric fell into darkness. Aric woke up 2 days later. He was lying on a mattress in the citadel. His head was splitting. His body felt like a stranger's. His mana was empty. Not a quarter, not a tenth. Empty. Absolute 0. He tried to summon a mug of water. Nothing. His fingers trembled. A chill in his chest. Emptiness. As if something important had been torn out from within. Senna sat beside him. Her face was weary, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She said he'd been unconscious for 2 days, that his mana was starting to recover but very slowly. That Vesna said he'd burned himself out almost to the limit. A little more and it would be irreversible damage. Aric asked what was happening with the army. Senna said it was holding its ground. Not storming, not retreating, just standing there. 2 days of silence. Not a single attack since the wall rose from the air. Aric tried to stand up. His legs wouldn't hold him. Senna sat him back down. She said Corrin was on the wall, that everything was under control, that he needed to lie down and recover. Aric lay there. He hated every second of it. He was a builder. His place was on the wall. His hands were meant to summon. Yet here he lay like a log, unable to conjure even a mug of water.
That was his vulnerability. The very one he'd known about from day one. Mana overexertion, fainting, helplessness. If Aldous had attacked during those 2 days, Valford wouldn't have had an endless supply. Just walls, just people, just Corrin and 250 fighters, against 10,000. But Aldous didn't attack. Corrin came in the evening, sat down next to him, said that Aldous' army was behaving strangely, not building new siege engines, not preparing assault ladders, not digging tunnels. The soldiers are sitting in camp, burning bonfires, waiting.
What they're waiting for is unclear. Maybe an order. Maybe something else. Corrin said that, in his experience, this is how an army behaves when its commander is in doubt. Aldous saw a wall grow out of thin air in a matter of minutes. He is a pragmatist. He reasons. If a boy can grow a wall out of nothing, what else is he capable of? If the wall is broken, he will grow a new one. And again, and again. How many casualties would it take a city with endless walls and endless arrows? Aldous doesn't know that Aric is unconscious right now. Aldous doesn't know that the mana is empty. Aldous sees the fortress and doesn't know its limits. And the unknown is more frightening than any wall. The third day. The mana began to return, slowly, drop by drop. Aric felt it like warm water filling an empty vessel. By the evening of the third day, he could summon a mug of water, a trifle, but there is mana. The fourth day, he summoned bread. Day 5, he got to his feet. Staggering, he made his way to the wall. He climbed up. He stood on the parapet so that Aldous' army could see him, a skinny guy on the wall, alive, standing, watching. He couldn't even summon a knife, but they didn't know that. To them, he was the one who builds fortresses out of thin air. The 6th day after losing consciousness. In the morning, a horseman with a white flag rode up to the gates. Not a knight, a man in civilian clothes, an advisor. He said that His Majesty King Aldous was offering negotiations. Aric agreed. They met in the neutral zone, between the moat and the camp, 2 chairs. Aric summoned them. His mana wavered. 2 chairs was almost nothing, but he couldn't have managed more right now. Aldous came without a guard, alone. He sat down. Aric sat across from him. Aldous looked at him for a long time. Then he spoke. He said he had lost 412 men wounded and 71 killed at these walls, 7 trebuchets. The trust of his generals, who believed that 500 men would be enough. And 2 days' sleep. Because he couldn't understand how a boy from a village at the edge of the world was building fortresses out of thin air. Aric was silent. He listened. Aldous said he wasn't a fool, that he saw what he saw. A city that couldn't be taken by conventional means. An army that has no need for supplies. A commander who can raise a wall before the eyes of 10,000. He could send another 20,000, or 30, and lose thousands. And maybe he'll take that city. Or maybe not. But as long as he keeps throwing men at those walls, the elves and demons will watch and rejoice. And when he weakens, they'll strike. Not at Valford, at the kingdom of men. Aric nodded. It was the same argument as before. But now there was something different in Aldous' voice. Not a threat. Calculation. Aldous said he was ready for a temporary truce. Not recognition. Not a peace treaty. A truce. Valford continues to exist. The royal army withdraws. But Valford does not expand into human lands, does not accept deserters from the royal army, does not harbor criminals. Aric looked at the king. A truce, not a victory. But not a defeat either. A respite, time. He said he would accept the truce on 2 conditions. First, Valford accepts everyone. Outcasts, refugees, those with nowhere else to go. This is not up for discussion. This is the law of Valford, and it will not change for any king. Second, the wounded from Aldous' army who are still in Valford's infirmary will be returned, free of charge, as a gesture of goodwill.
Aldous watched, for a long time, with a heavy, dark gaze. Then he said he could not officially accept the first condition, but he could turn a blind eye to it. As for the deserters, Corin, he knows that the deserter knight Corin is here. Varen reported it. But to pursue him into the Forbidden Forest would mean storming the walls again. So, let him live. He accepted the second condition. They stood up. Aldous looked at the wall behind Aric. Double-layered, 6 meters high, stone-facing, towers. The one that had risen out of thin air in 8 minutes. He asked, the same question as the first time. Who is he? Aric answered. A year ago, he was nobody. A nobody. They tied him up and threw him into this forest like trash, without food, without weapons, without hope. He didn't die. And on that first night, he realized one thing. A man from whom everything has been taken has nothing left but one thing, to build it all over again. He is building, and behind these walls live all those whom the world has... His voice was even, calm, without anger, without defiance, a simple statement of fact. Aldous was silent. Then he nodded, turned around, walked back to his camp. 2 hours later, the army began breaking camp. By evening, the column was moving south. 10,000 people were leaving the city walls where 800 lived. Aric stood on the wall, Corin beside him, Senna beside him, Vesna. Pook sat on the parapet, dangling his feet. Below, people were emerging from the basements. Children looked up at the sky. Some were crying, some were laughing, some just stood there, breathing. Corin said this wasn't the end, that a truce was just a piece of paper, that Aldous would return when he found a way, or when the elves and demons gave him a reason. Aric said he knew, but today they were standing, the wall stood, people were alive, and the army was leaving. That was enough for today. In the evening, Aric gathered everyone in the square. 800 people, men, women, children, a goblin on a barrel. He didn't give speeches. He simply said that Valford had held out, that the army had left, that there would be more battles and more threats, but that this place had now proven its right to exist, not with words, with walls, with arrows, and by the fact that none of the enemies had been killed without need, and by the fact that wounded enemies were healed and sent home. This is Valford, a place where no one is cast out, not even enemies. The people were silent. Then someone slammed a fist on the table, and again, and again. The pounding grew louder, hundreds of fists on tables, on walls, on shields. Not applause, not a shout, a pounding, rhythmic, powerful. The pounding of builders, people who build. Aric stood and listened. Mana was slowly returning, warm, quiet, like blood in his veins. Tomorrow he would summon again. Walls, houses, tools, weapons, food, everything he needed. Because his class wasn't a sword or magic. His class was everything. And as long as he stood, Valford stood. After the army left, Aldous Aric gave himself 3 days rest. Not because he wanted to, because his body left him no choice. Mana was returning slowly, like a river after a drought, a thin trickle, then wider, then deeper. By the 10th day after waking, he could summon large objects again. Not walls, but carts and beams and stacks of planks. The 12th day, full mana, for the first time in 2 weeks, and something had changed. The reservoir had grown, noticeably larger, as if that night when he summoned a wall at his limit had stretched its boundaries. Vesna said that was normal, that every class grows by pushing past its limits. A mage who casts spells until he passes out wakes up with a larger reserve. A warrior who fights until complete exhaustion recovers stronger. Aric had gone through his first real breakthrough and had become more powerful. That was good and dangerous, because the temptation to do it again is great, and next time might be the last. Valford had changed after the siege. People walked with more purpose. They looked more confident. They had survived 10,000. They had stood on the walls and not run. 800 against an army, and they held their ground. That does something to people. It turns refugees into citizens. It turns frightened outcasts into those who know their own worth. Aric saw it every day, and every day, new ones arrived. After the siege, the flow tripled. The news spread across the continent. A city in the Forbidden Forest that had repelled the royal army. A king who builds walls out of air. A place where they feed you and don't turn you away. A month after the siege, another 300 people arrived. The total population exceeded 1,000. And then the non-humans came. First, the goblins, 4 from the Pook tribe. They had seen how the Pook lived, well-fed, clothed, with a workshop, with respect. They came and stood at the gate just as the Pook had once done, skinny, wet, hungry. Aric let them in. Then a family of ogres arrived, 2 adults and 3 cubs. The ogres were enormous, 3 meters tall, as wide as wardrobes, but quiet, timid. They had been driven out of a mountain cave by other ogres. For what? Because their father refused to eat captives. Vegetarian ogres. The world is full of wonders. Aric conjured a home for them, a big one, with high ceilings, with a wide door. The ogres entered. They sat on the floor. The ogre mother hugged her cubs and wept quietly. Then an elf came, alone, young, about 70 years old, which for an elf meant a teenager. His name was Lirin. He had fled the Forest Empire because he didn't want to join the army, not out of cowardice, out of conviction. He considered war senseless, all 3 wars on the continent senseless. He was caught while attempting to cross the border, sentenced to execution. He escaped from custody and fled to the only place where the Imperial Guard wouldn't dare venture, to the Forbidden Forest. He wandered for 3 weeks until he found Valford. Vesna met him at the gates. She spoke to him in Elvish, then in human. Then she led him to Aric. She said that Lirin was genuine, not a spy, too young and too frightened to be a spy. Aric let him in. By the start of the 9th month, Valford had become what Aric had envisioned, a city for everyone. Humans, goblins, ogres, elves, all together, all under one wall, all under one set of laws. No one is turned away, everyone works, everyone protects one another. There was friction. Of course there was. The former human soldier eyed the goblins warily. The goblins kept their distance from the ogres. The ogres were afraid of everyone. Lirin didn't speak at all the first week, but gradually the boundaries faded. Because in Valford, everyone did the same work. They built, they dug, they guarded, they ate at the same table. And when a human stands shoulder to shoulder with a goblin on the wall, both gazing into the darkness of the forest, waiting for the creatures to attack, then origin ceases to matter. Aric continued to study, every day with Pook, every evening with Vesna. Pook taught him mechanics. Vesna taught him theory. She knew a great deal about the system, more than anyone else on the continent. She explained how mana works, how it flows, how it regenerates, and she explained the rift, that place in the fabric of the world through which Aric draws his summons. Vesna said the rift isn't the same everywhere. It's thinner in the center of the Forbidden Forest and thicker at the edges. Aric is at the edge. His summons work. But in the center of the forest, where the rift is thinnest, his abilities could be many times stronger, and many times more dangerous, because the hollow call lives in the center. Aric thought about this every night. The beacon in Pook's workshop vibrated quietly, pointing toward the center of the forest. He knew that sooner or later he would have to go there, to figure out what the hollow call was, where his class came from, and what the system was actually summoning. But not now. There was too much work to do right now. In the 9th month, Valford declared itself, not a kingdom, not yet, as the Free City of Valford, an independent territory within the Forbidden Forest. Aric wrote a declaration, a short one, just 1 page. Valford belongs to everyone who lives there. Valford makes no claim to the lands of the 3 powers. Valford does not threaten or strike first. Valford welcomes anyone who comes in peace, any race, of any origin. This is not a request. It is a declaration. Corin said that declarations are useless without an army to back them up. Aric replied that they do have an army, a small one, but one that 10,000 couldn't take. Corin nodded. You can't argue with that. Vesna sent copies of the declaration to all three powers by magical messages, thin threads of mana carrying a scroll of text. 3 threads, 3 directions. The human kingdom to the south, the forest empire to the north, the demon abyss to the west. The reply came 2 weeks later. The demons were the first to respond. Mazareth sent a message, a short one, in a demonic language that Vesna translated. Lord Mazareth takes note of the declaration of the free city of Valford. Lord Mazareth neither acknowledges nor rejects it. Lord Mazareth is watching. Vesna said that for Mazareth, this was almost a compliment. He usually does not respond at all to those he considers beneath him. The kingdom of men did not respond. Silence. Aldous is thinking, or preparing something, or simply ignoring it. The elves were the last to respond, and their reply was cold. The Council of Elders of the Forest Empire does not recognize any settlements in the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest is the territory of the Rift. No one has the right to settle there. Any attempt to establish a foothold in the forest will be considered a threat to the Empire's security. Vesna read the message aloud. Then she translated it for those who did not understand the official Elven language. Then she said quietly that the council was not joking, that the elves considered the Forbidden Forest their zone of responsibility. Not territory, specifically a zone of responsibility. Because they are the only ones who know enough about the Rift and the Hollow Call to truly fear them. Aric stood on the wall and looked north, where somewhere out there, beyond the endless forest, stood elven cities in the treetops. Mages who can scorch fields, barriers that cannot be breached, 1,000 years of war experience. He had repelled a human army, but not an elven one. Vesna said he might have 6 months. Elves do not act quickly. They think. They vote in the council. It will take months. But when they decide, they will come. Silently, without warning, without envoys. Just one morning, the forest around Valford will be full of elven warriors. Aric nodded. 6 months. He looked at his town. 1,200 residents, houses, workshops, a smithy, an infirmary, walls, a citadel, vegetable gardens, pens. The first fields beyond the second ring of walls, children running through the streets. Pook is sitting on the workshop roof, tinkering with yet another mechanism. Ogres are hauling logs for the new wall. Lirin is sitting by the gate, reading the book Aric summoned for him yesterday. 6 months. He'll make it. He has to make it. Because if he doesn't, all these people, all these goblins and ogres, and that one young elf who didn't want fight will be left defenseless. And then everything he has built will crumble to dust. The 10th month. Aric decided to head toward the center of the forest. He had put it off for too long. The beacon vibrated every day, quietly, insistently, like a reminder. Vesna said that if he wanted to truly understand his class, he needed to reach the source, to the rift, to the hollow call. Otherwise, he would remain just a guy who pulls things out of the void without knowing where they come from or at what cost. Aric called a meeting. He said he was leaving for a week, maybe 2, deep into the forest, alone. Corin objected. He said it was madness. That deep in the forest lurked creatures even the devourers avoided. That Aric was the only summoner, and if he died, Valford would be left without supplies, without walls, without weapons. Aric replied that that was exactly why he had to go, because he was the only one, and if he didn't fully understand his power, he might burn himself out completely in the next battle. And then Valford would definitely be left with nothing. Corin didn't agree, but he obeyed. Senna hugged Aric, tightly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Vesna gave him a map, a rough one, pieced together from fragments of old elven texts. Beacons stood in a chain from the edge of the forest to the center. Each one pointed to the next. He had to go from beacon to beacon. Pook volunteered to go with him. Aric refused. Pook was needed in Valford. Without him, no one can repair mechanisms or build traps. Pook took offense. He sat in the corner of the workshop and didn't speak for half the day. Then he came over and silently slipped a small mechanism into Aric's hand. A folding knife with 3 blades and a bottle opener. He'd put it together himself, from scraps. Aric took the knife. He looked at Pook. The goblin looked up at him with his huge yellow eyes. Aric crouched down. He put his hand on the goblin's shoulder. He said he'd be back. Pook nodded. In the morning, Aric walked out through the gate. He had a backpack with water and food. The summoned ones. Pook's knife on his belt. Nothing else. Steel he could summon along the way. He headed north, deeper in. The forest changed with every kilometer. The trees grew thicker, older, their trunks covered in 3 layers of moss. Roots jutted out of the ground like the backs of sleeping beasts. Light barely penetrated. A greenish twilight. Silence. Not dead, alive. The forest was breathing. Aric could feel it. Literally. The air was moving. Rhythmically. Like a breath. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. He found the first beacon after 2 days of travel, just like the one Pook had brought. A metal cylinder with symbols, the same strange alloy, silvery with a hint of blue, it more strongly than the first. The mana in Aric's chest responded, stronger than last time. Not a jolt, a hum, like a string being plucked. He placed his hand on it. The symbols flashed, with a dim bluish light, and Aric saw the direction, not with his eyes, with a feeling, like a compass inside. That way, north, deeper. He walked for 4 days, from beacon to beacon. Each one vibrated more strongly. The mana responded louder. By the 4th beacon, the hum had become constant, low, on the verge of audibility, not in his ears, in his bones, in his blood. The creatures in this part of the forest were different, larger, stranger. One looked like a walking tree, 6 meters tall, roots instead of legs, branches instead of arms, and eyes. A dozen eyes in the bark of the trunk. It was looking at Aric. It didn't attack, it just stood there and watched. Aric walked past. The creature turned to watch him go. It followed him with all 12 eyes. Another creature was flying, huge, a wingspan of 10 meters, a body like a stingray's, flat, black, headless, just a mouth at the bottom. It glided silently between the treetops. Aric saw its shadow on the ground. It didn't attack. It flew past, as if it hadn't noticed. Or maybe it had noticed and decided not to bother. By the 5th day, Aric came upon a place unlike anything he had seen before. A clearing. Huge, 100 meters in diameter, perfectly round. The trees around it stood like a solid wall, like a fence, as if something were preventing them from growing inside the circle. The ground in the clearing was smooth. No grass, no moss. Stone. Smooth, gray stone, as if polished. And in the middle of the clearing stood a pillar. A stone pillar. 3 meters tall, 1 meter wide. Covered with the same symbols as the beacons. But here, there were thousands of symbols. They covered every centimeter of the surface, and they glowed, dimly, bluish, pulsing, like a heartbeat. Aric stepped onto the stone clearing, and the world changed. The mana inside him flared up. It didn't hum, it exploded. As if the reservoir he thought was full turned out to be a glass, and here he was shown an ocean. He fell to his knees. Not from pain, from the scale of it. He felt the rift. Here, right here. The boundary between worlds was as thin as a sheet of paper. On the other side, there was something. Not emptiness, not darkness. Space. Infinite. full of things. Billions upon billions of things. Hammers and swords and books and mechanisms and buildings and ships and things he didn't know the names of. Things from worlds he couldn't imagine. His catalog, his entire ability. It wasn't a collection of objects he had studied. It was a window into infinity. Everything he had ever summoned came from there, from beyond that boundary, from another world. A crust of bread from a stranger's table in an unfamiliar world. A knife from a forge on the other end of reality. Planks from a forest that doesn't exist in Valgrund. Every summoning is a hand reaching across the rift. And then he heard a voice. Not a voice, something more. A sensation of words, meaning without sound. The hollow call. It spoke. No, it didn't speak. It was. A presence. Ancient. Primordial. Older than the forest. Older than the mountains. Older than the three realms and the system and perhaps Valgrund itself. The hollow call was not a being, not a monster, not a god. It was the rift. The rift itself was alive, or something close to being alive. The place where worlds meet. The point of contact. It had always existed, and it waited. Waited for one who could use it consciously, not by chance, not chaotically like the monsters that fell through the rift from other worlds, but purposefully, with understanding, with will. The Summoner, a class that wasn't chosen by chance, a class the rift created for whoever proved worthy. A blank line at birth, not the absence of a class. A seal. A sealed ability waiting to be awakened. Through a deadly trial. Through the moment when a person, on the brink of death, chooses to live and breaks the seal. All the blank slates in Valgrund's history were like that. Potential summoners, but they all perished. They failed the trial, or never found themselves in a situation deadly enough for the seal to crack. Aric was the first in centuries to survive, who killed the devourer with his bare hands, who was desperate enough and resilient enough. The hollow call made him understand this, without words, through images, through sensations, through a stream of knowledge that flowed like a river. And one more thing, the price. Summoning isn't free. Mana is Aric's payment, but there's a price on the other side. Every summoned object is something taken from another world. Bread vanished from a table, a knife missing from a workshop, a plank pulled from the wall of someone's house. Trifles. Trifles for now. But if Aric keeps summoning more and more, walls, fortresses, siege engines, entire cities, piece by piece, he will start pulling not trifles from other worlds, but chunks of reality. And that could harm those worlds. The rift showed him a world where a wall had vanished, a world where a bridge had collapsed because a support beam had been pulled from it. Small-scale destruction, random. Aric didn't choose what exactly he pulled. The system selected the nearest suitable object beyond the boundary, and it wasn't always an object that could be taken without consequences. Aric knelt on a stone clearing. Tears streamed down his face. Not from pain, from understanding. His power comes at a price. Not for him, for those he will never see. For the worlds beyond the rift. Every summoned object is someone's loss. The hollow call did not judge. It did not warn. It simply showed. The choice was Aric's. He could summon endlessly. The rift placed no limits. But every summoning was a decision. What to take, from whom, and whether it was worth it. Aric stood up. He wiped his face. He looked at the pillar, at the symbols, at the light. He asked aloud if it was possible to summon without taking, without stealing from other worlds. The answer came. It is possible, but it is more expensive. Much more expensive. If you do not pull a ready-made object from another world, but create it from the pure energy of the rift, then mana is consumed 10 times faster. A simple knife from another world costs a drop. A knife created from the energy of the rift costs a stream. A wall from another world costs a torrent. A wall made of energy costs a river. But in return, no one will suffer. No world will lose a piece of itself, Aric thought. A tenfold price. That means his capabilities are reduced tenfold. A wall he could summon in a minute would now take 10, and he wouldn't have enough mana for half of it. But it was a fair price, not stolen. His. He chose it. A pure summoning, without theft. More expensive, harder, but fair. He turned and walked back, to Valford, to his people, with new knowledge, and with a new limitation that would make everything 10 times harder. Aric returned 9 days later. Valford greeted him with silence, then with shouts, then with fists pounding on tables. He entered the gate and Pook rushed toward him, clung to his leg, wouldn't let go. Senna was standing by the well, watching. She didn't run, she just watched. Then she smiled. That was enough. Corin nodded from the wall, a silent greeting. Vesna waited in the citadel. Aric convened a council that very evening, 5 at the table. He told them everything, the rift, the hollow call, the truth about the summoning, theft from other worlds, and his decision. A pure summoning, a tenfold price. Silence at the table. Corin spoke first. He said that this meant Aric would have 10 times fewer resources in the next battle, that the wall he used to summon in 8 minutes would now take 80, or he might not be able to do it at all, that the crossbow bolts, which used to be endless, were now finite, that the endless supply was no longer endless. Aric confirmed it. It was all true. Corin fell silent. Then he asked why. Why give up power for the sake of worlds he'll never see, people he'll never meet, when there are 1,200 people here who depend on him, when the elven army could arrive in 3 months? Aric replied that Valford was built on a principle. No one is cast out. No one is wronged. No one is exploited. Stealing from other worlds to build your own is the same as taking from the weak to feed the strong. That's what the 3 powers do. That's what everyone living in Valford fled from. And if he starts doing the same thing, even toward those he can't see, how is he any better than King Aldous, who burns villages for the sake of his realm's security? Senna nodded. She said Aric was right, that if the foundation is rotten, the house will collapse. It doesn't matter what kind of walls they are. Vesna said that a tenfold price is serious, but not fatal, because Aric has grown stronger. His reservoir expanded after pushing past his limits at the walls during Aldous' siege, and it can grow further if he trains. If he summons every day to the limit, not until he faints, but until he's exhausted. The muscle that works gets stronger. The mana that's spent gets deeper. Pook raised his hand. Everyone looked at him. The goblin said one word. Learn. Aric didn't understand. Pook explained. If a pure summon costs 10 times as much, then Aric must know every detail 10 times better, because knowledge makes the summon cheaper. It worked before, and it will work now. If he studied every mechanism down to the last screw, every board down to the grain, every stone down to the grain, then the tenfold price would become 5-fold, and then 3-fold, and then maybe 2-fold. Knowledge offsets the price. Aric looked at Pook. The goblin sat on his low stool. His ears were sticking out. His eyes were shining. A little genius. Aric nodded. To teach. A new phase had begun. Aric studied like a man possessed, every morning with Pook. Mechanisms, every bolt, every gear, every spring. He took the crossbow apart into 37 pieces, assembled it, took it apart, assembled it, until he could reproduce every detail with his eyes closed. Then he summoned the crossbow. With a pure summons. Mana was draining, but less than yesterday, a drop less every day. The knowledge was working. During the day, he worked with the blacksmith, studied metallurgy, how to smelt ore, how to harden steel, how to forge, not to forge himself, to understand. Every nuance of hardening is a nuance of summoning. Steel hardened in oil differs from steel hardened in water. He had to know the difference. To summon the right steel, to make the summoning cheaper. Evenings with Vesna. Magic. Not combat magic, theoretical magic. How mana flows through materials, how it interacts with matter, how the rift forms summoned objects from pure energy. Vesna was a scientist. She broke the process down into its components. She explained the formulas. She drew diagrams. Aric soaked it all in. Every evening he summoned something new, tested it, measured mana consumption, jotted it down in a notebook. His 20th notebook by this point. The results showed up a month later. A pure summon of a crossbow now cost not 10 times as much, but 6. A pure summon of simple things like nails and planks was almost on par with the old standard summon. Because Aric knew a plank better than any carpenter in Valgrund. He knew every grain, every knot, every crack. To him, a plank was transparent. And the summoning cost a penny. After 2 months of training, complex items had dropped to 4 times their original price. After 3 months, to 3 times. Pook was right. Knowledge compensates. And at the same time, his mana was growing. Vesna was right too. Daily summoning on the verge of exhaustion expanded the reservoir. Slowly, but surely. By the 13th month since his exile, Aric could summon with a pure summon as much as he had before with a regular one. Not a tenfold loss. 0. He had made up for it completely, with knowledge and mana growth, and Valford was learning to do without summoning. Senna had organized agriculture. The fields beyond the second ring of walls yielded grain. The vegetable gardens yielded vegetables. The pens yielded meat and milk. The smithy forged tools and weapons from ore found in the hills west of the city. Not summoned, real, handmade. Aric no longer fed 1,200 people out of thin air. They fed themselves. His mana went toward defense, toward the walls, toward weapons, toward strategic reserves, and toward preparing for what was coming. Vesna sensed movement in the north. The elven army was gathering, not quickly, but relentlessly. The Council of Elders had made its decision. Valford must be destroyed, not because it was a threat, because it stood on the rift, and the summoner was too dangerous. Aric stood on the wall. He looked north. They would come, soon. This time, not men with swords and trebuchets, elves with magic thousands of years old, barriers, illusions, battle spells, against which walls of stone and wood mean almost nothing. He needed a plan, a different plan, not defending the walls. Magic requires magic, or something no one expects. He closed his eyes. He pictured everything he knew, every mechanism, every material, every principle, thousands of items in his catalog, and he began to think. The elves arrived at the start of the 15th month. Vesna sensed them 3 days earlier. Magical auras, hundreds, thousands, moving silently through the forest. Without supply trains, without siege engines, without roads. The elven army did not march through the forest. It flowed through it, like water through stones. 7,000 warriors, 200 mages, and at the head, Empress Elindris herself. She had come in person. That meant one thing. The Council of Elders had decided that Valford must disappear for good. And the Empress had come to see it through. Corin stood on the wall. He watched. He said quietly that it was easier with a human army. Humans make noise. They set up camp. They light fires. You can see them. You can count on them and plan with them. Elves are invisible. They're already all around us, from every side. Even the moat and the walls won't buy us time, because the mages will strike first, and the walls will melt. Aric nodded. He knew, and he had a plan. 3 months of preparation. He didn't build the walls any higher. He didn't set up more ballistas. He didn't call for more crossbows. Against magic, it's useless. Instead, he did something else. Underground passages. A whole network. Under the city. Under the walls. Beyond the walls. 30 exits in the forest within a 500-step radius of Valford. Hidden. Camouflaged. Each exit covered by a hatch made of wood and earth, invisible from the outside. He built the tunnels in sections: wooden wall paneling, supports, ventilation shafts. Pook helped. He designed the drainage so the tunnels wouldn't flood. He calculated the load so they wouldn't collapse. Corin didn't understand why. Tunnels for retreat. But Aric wasn't planning to retreat. The tunnels weren't for retreat, for a counterattack. If the enemy is standing around the walls and striking with magic, there's no need to sit behind the walls and take the blow. You need to get behind the enemy, emerge from underground, where they aren't expecting it. Second, a new generation of traps. Not rope-based, not mechanical, magnetic. Pook found a strange mineral in the forest. Black, heavy, attracting iron. A magnetic stone. Aric studied its properties and conjured up a batch of fist-sized magnets. Pook designed a trap, a magnet inside a clay casing, a trigger mechanism. When the target passes by, the spring is triggered. The casing opens. The magnet activates. Everything made of iron within a 5-step radius flies toward the magnet. Swords, arrowheads, buckles, armor. A warrior in armor suddenly feels himself being pulled sideways, toward the ground. He cannot move. The iron on him has become an anchor. Against elves in light armor with minimal metal, this is less effective. But Aric added a second element: potter's clay. Thin clay balls filled with magnetic stone dust. Upon hitting the ground, the ball shatters. The dust flies in a cloud. It gets in the eyes, into the lungs. It blinds. It chokes. It doesn't kill, but it incapacitates for minutes. For a mage, this is a disaster. A mage who cannot see his target cannot cast spells accurately. A mage who is coughing cannot utter a spell. The third, Vesna. Aric worked with her every evening for 3 months. They found a way to combine magic and summoning. Vesna casts a barrier. Aric summons material inside the barrier. The barrier becomes more than just a shield of mana. It becomes a wall of mana and stone. A magical attack strikes the barrier. The barrier absorbs the magical component. The stone absorbs the physical one. Double protection. Neither magic nor physical force can break through. But this requires synchronized work. Vesna sets it up. Aric fills it. Simultaneously. They practiced hundreds of times. Their synchronization became nearly perfect. Fourth, diplomacy. Aric sent a message to Mazareth through a demonic envoy who had visited Valford 3 times already. Trade visits. Mazareth was interested in summoned items. He wanted to understand the mechanics. Aric gave him something. Not secrets. Goods. Summoned tools that did not exist on Valgrund. Complex mechanisms based on knowledge Aric had gained from the Rift. The demons received items they could not create themselves. Valford secured the demons' neutrality. Not an alliance, neutrality. Mazareth will not intervene if the elves attack. But he won't help the elves either. That's half the victory. 1 army instead of 2. Aldous' message was different. Aric wrote plainly. The elves are marching on Valford. If they destroy the city, they will gain control of the Rift, of the place where worlds meet. Elves with access to the Rift will become invincible. They will be able to pull things from other worlds. Weapons, materials, perhaps creatures. The human kingdom would face an enemy with endless resources. Valford was the buffer between them. Destroy the buffer, and you'd be left alone with the elves. Aldous was silent for 3 days. Then he sent a reply. 1 word. No. He won't help. Aric wasn't surprised. Aldous is a pragmatist. He won't risk his army for a city that repelled his siege 6 months ago. But he won't stab them in the back either. That's something. The 15th month, the 3rd day. The elven army closed the ring around Valford. 7,000 warriors, invisible among the trees. 200 mages ready to strike. And Empress Elindris on a white stag, surrounded by her personal guard. In the morning, the mages struck, without warning, without envoys. A wall of fire, 20 meters high, crashed onto Valford from the north. Simultaneously, from the south, a wave of icy spears. From the west, a windstorm tearing off roofs. From the east, an earthen rampart rising toward the walls. The four elements, all at once. 200 mages. Vesna screamed. She raised her hands. A barrier rose. Aric summoned stone within the barrier. Slab by slab, a barrier wall. The fire struck and spread. The ice shattered. The wind shattered. The earth pressed against the stone and stood firm. The first strike was repelled, but Vesna was shaking. 200 mages against one mage and one summoner. She wouldn't withstand a second volley. Aric activated the plan. He shouted to Corin, "The tunnels." Corin gave the signal. 36 fighters vanished from the surface. They dove into the ghouls. They ran through the tunnels. 30 exits in the forest. 30 hatches opened behind the elven army. 30 fighters with sacks of clay balls. They hurled the balls into the thick of the mages. The clay shattered. Dust from the magnetic stone flew in clouds. The elven mages coughed. They clutched their eyes. Spells were cut short. Fireballs flew into the sky instead of at the walls. Icy spears melted in midair. Chaos. Valford's fighters didn't fight. They hurled the balls and dived back into the tunnels. They vanished. The elven warriors rushed toward the tunnel exits, but the hatches slammed shut, camouflaged. Where to look? The ground was flat. The moss was untouched, as if no one had been there. The mage's second volley never came. Half were blinded, a quarter were coughing, the rest were disoriented. The commanders are shouting. The Empress's guard has closed ranks around her. Aric stood on the wall. He watched. The first phase worked, but this is only the beginning. The elves are regrouping. The mages will rinse their eyes and strike again, with triple the fury. He didn't need to win. You can't defeat 7,000 elves and 200 mages with 800 fighters. He needed to make them stop, to make continuing the attack unprofitable. He summoned a megaphone, a big one, a metal one. He stood on the wall and spoke, loudly, to the whole forest. He addressed Empress Elindris. He said he knew why she had come, not because of the city, because of the rift, because of the summoner at the rift. Because the Council of Elders fears that the summoner will gain access to infinite resources and become a threat to the balance of power on Valgrund. He said the Council was right about one thing. The rift is dangerous. But the Council was wrong about another. The rift cannot be controlled by destroying Valford. The rift existed before Valford, before the Three Realms, before the system. It will continue to exist afterward, and if Aric dies, the rift won't close. There simply won't be anyone to control it, and monsters will continue to come through the rift. And one day, something will come that the three powers cannot handle. He said he had made a choice, that he had switched to pure summoning, that he no longer steals things from other worlds, that his summoning now creates from the energy of the rift rather than stealing, and that he is the only one on Valgrund who can do this, the only one standing between the rift and chaos. Silence. The forest was silent. 7,000 elves listened. Then a voice, a woman's, clear, cold as a winter morning. Empress Elindris replied. She asked why she should believe a human boy sitting on the rift who claims to control it. Aric replied that he wasn't asking for belief, he was asking for verification. Let the Empress send her mages to the rift. Let them see for themselves. Let them study it. Let them confirm that a pure summons does not harm other worlds. He isn't closing the rift, he's inviting them to look. Because secrecy is what breeds fear, and Valford does not build on fear. Silence again, a long one, a minute, 2, 3. Then Elindris's voice, brief. She said she was withdrawing the army for a single day, to reflect. Not a truce, a pause. The army retreated 300 paces. It did not leave, it retreated. They stood in a circle in the forest, waiting. Aric climbed down from the wall. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. He sat down on the ground. Senna crouched down beside him. She held out a mug of water. He drank and spilled it because his hands couldn't hold it steady. Corin approached. He said that one day isn't a victory. Aric said he knew. But one day is one day, and on that day, something could happen that would change the situation. He turned out to be right. By evening, a demon envoy emerged at the gates of Valford, the very one, with horns and a tail. He brought a message from Mazareth, a short one. The Lord of Demons proposed a meeting, a four-way meeting, humans, elves, demons, Valford, at a neutral table, to discuss the status of the Forbidden Forest and the Rift. Mazareth wasn't saving Valford. Mazareth was playing his own game. He wanted a seat at the table where the fate of the Rift is decided. If Aric controls the Rift, then Mazareth wants to know the terms. And for that, Aric needs to be alive. Aric read the message. Then he passed it to Vesna. Vesna read it. She looked at him. She said it was a chance, the only one. If the four-way meeting takes place, Valford will automatically be recognized as a party, an equal, the fourth power. At the negotiating table, Aric nodded. He delivered Mazareth's message to Empress Elindris via a messenger and sent a copy to King Aldis. Night. The longest night in Valford's history. No one slept. Morning dawned gray. Fog lay over the forest like a blanket. Valford's walls glistened with moisture. Aric stood on the citadel's roof. He hadn't slept all night. He stared into the fog. Somewhere out there were 7,000 elves. Somewhere behind the forest, tens of thousands of human soldiers. Somewhere beyond the mountains, demonic hordes. And one city in the center. 1,500 people by this day. Humans, goblins, ogres, one elf. Everyone is waiting. Elindris's reply came first. A messenger stepped out to the wall. A young elf in silver armor. He said the Empress accepts the proposal for a four-way meeting, on the condition that the meeting takes place on neutral territory, not in Valford, not in the Elven camp. On a stone clearing in the center of the forest, at the Rift Pillar. Aric agreed. Aldis's reply came a few hours later. A mounted messenger rode up from the south, wet, exhausted. He'd clearly been riding all night. The letter was short. Aldis would come. Not because he wanted to help Valford, because he couldn't let the other three parties decide the fate of the Rift without him. Mazareth confirmed through his envoy. The meeting in 3 days. The stone glade, the center of the forest. Aric prepared. Not for battle, for a conversation. He spent 3 days with Vesna. She explained the protocol, how to speak to the Elven Empress, how to address the human king, how to behave with the demon lord. Aric listened. He memorized it. But he knew that when it came down to it, he would speak as he knew how. Simply, directly, like a guy from a village at the edge of the world. Because he didn't know how to pretend to be someone else, and he wasn't going to. On the 3rd day, they set out. Aric, Vesna, Corin, Senna, Pook. 5 of them. The entire Valford Council. No guards needed. If the 3 powers decided to kill them during the negotiations, no security would help. They walked through the forest for a day and a half, toward the center. Aric already knew the way. The beacons led them. The mana hummed louder with every step. A stone clearing opened up before them like an arena, round, 100 meters. The rift pillar in the center. The symbols pulsed with blue light. The elven delegation was already standing to the north. Empress Elindris, tall, slender, an ageless face, hair white down to the ground, eyes silver, cold. Beside her stood 4 elders and a dozen guards. Aldis rode up from the south, on horseback, in battle armor. 6 knights accompanied him. His face was grim, his eyes heavy. He looked at Aric, nodded, barely noticeably. Mazareth came from the west, and Aric saw the demon lord for the first time. He had expected a monster, huge, horned, terrifying. Mazareth was short, slightly taller than Aric, thin. His skin was dark burgundy, his horns were small, almost decorative. His eyes were black, completely, no whites. Two black mirrors in which the world was reflected. He didn't look scary. He looked old, unimaginably old, like a stone that had survived 1,000 winters. He moved slowly, smoothly, every gesture economical. He was accompanied by 2 advisors and not a single guard. Why? He himself was more dangerous than any guard. The 4 sides stood at the 4 corners of the pillar: north, south, west, east. Elves, humans, demons, Valford. Aelindris spoke first. Her voice was even, emotionless. She said that the Council of Elders considered the rift a threat to the existence of all 3 realms. That the monsters coming through the rift had been a problem for centuries. That the summoner at the rift made the problem 1,000 times worse. Because the summoner isn't just pulling monsters, he's pulling things, weapons, materials, entire walls. And if his power falls into the wrong hands, or if he loses control, the consequences will be catastrophic. Aldous spoke second, briefly. He said he agreed with the elves' assessment of the threat, but he disagreed with the method. Destroying Valford does not mean destroying the rift. The rift existed before Valford and will exist after. The question isn't whether to destroy it or not. The question is who controls it. Mazareth spoke last, quietly, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. He said he remembered the times before the system, when the rift was open, when not monsters but entire armies from other worlds came through it. Chaos, war, thousands of dead. The system was created to close the rift, to seal it, to control it. The summoner class is neither a coincidence nor a gift. It is a safety valve. A release, a way to vent the pressure from the rift in a controlled manner. Without a summoner, the rift will accumulate energy, and one day it will burst, like a dam. And then something will pour into Valgrund that the 3 powers cannot defend against. Silence. Everyone was looking at Mazareth. Even Aelindris, even Aldous. Mazareth knew. He remembered. He was alive when the system was created. Aric stood and listened. A safety valve. The valve. His class is not a reward, not a punishment. It is a function, essential for the survival of all of Valgrund. Without him, the rift will burst. He looked at his hands, the hands of a builder, the hands of a repairman, hands that had spent a lifetime patching other people's roofs and fixing other people's fences. And now they were patching the rift between worlds. He spoke, quietly, calmly, without a megaphone. But on the stone clearing, the silence was such that every word could be heard. He said that 1.5 years ago, he was a nobody. A nobody. They had tied him up and thrown into this forest like trash, without food, without weapons, without hope. He didn't die. He killed a monster with his bare hands. He gained a class, and he began to build. Not out of a thirst for power, not out of revenge, out of the only thing left to a man from whom everything had been taken. Out of the need to create a place where no one would ever be cast out again. He said that Valford is not a threat. Valford is the answer. To a question the 3 powers had been unable to resolve for centuries. Who will guard the rift? Who will stand between the worlds and prevent chaos from breaking through? Not that the elves who have hidden from the rift behind barriers for centuries. Not the humans who knew nothing of it at all. Not the demons who remember the last breach and fear the next. But the city that stands right on top of it. A city of outcasts that welcomes everyone. That does not wage war to destroy. A city that heals the wounded enemies and releases prisoners. A city built from nothing by a single guy with a storekeeper's class. He said he doesn't ask for recognition out of mercy. He asks for recognition out of calculation. Valford controls the rift. Valford is a buffer between the three powers. Valford takes in those whom all three cast out. Outcasts, refugees, deserters, those who would otherwise become a problem for each of the three powers. Valford solves the problems of all three at once. This is not a threat, it is a service. And for this service, he asks for one thing: a seat at the table, a voice, a fourth chair. He fell silent. The pillar of the rift pulsed behind him. Blue light played across their faces. Elindris looked at him. Her silver eyes did not blink. Aldous watched. A heavy gaze, appraising. Mazareth watched. Two black mirrors. Aric was reflected in them. A skinny guy, 19 years old. No, 20. He turned 20 2 months ago. He hadn't noticed.
He'd had no time to notice. Elindris spoke first. She said she wanted to see the rift, in person. She wanted her mages to verify the claim of a pure summoning. If confirmed, she was ready to discuss it. Aldous said he wasn't a mage and didn't understand half of what was said, but he understood the logistics. A city that feeds itself and controls a strategic point is an asset, not a threat. If Valford guarantees neutrality and a buffer zone between the three powers, then the kingdom of men is ready to discuss recognition. Mazareth smirked, the first emotion on his face in all this time. He said that in a year and a half, the boy had done what the three powers couldn't do in 1,000 years. He'd forced them to sit down at the same table. The negotiations lasted 3 days, on stone clearing by the rift pillar. The elven mages inspected the rift. They confirmed it. A pure summoning does not harm other worlds. Aric demonstrated. He summoned a stone made of the rift's pure energy. The mages saw the flow. Pure. No threads leading to other worlds. No theft. Elindris nodded, satisfied. The four of them drafted the treaty. Vesna formulated it in 4 languages: human, elven, demonic, and in the language of Valford, which was essentially human, but Vesna insisted that the fourth power should have its own version. Valford's status: free city. The fourth power: Valgrund, an independent territory in the Forbidden Forest, governed by a council of 5. Borders: the Forbidden Forest from edge to edge, no man's land that has become someone's. Valford's obligations: control of the rift, preventing a breach, accepting refugees and outcasts from all 3 sides, neutrality in wars between the 3 powers. Valford's rights: trade with all 3, self-governance, its own army to defend the rift, a vote at 4-party meetings. Signed on the 4th day, 4 signatures: Elindris, Aldous, Mazareth, Aric, on a single sheet, parchment that Aric conjured from pure energy, so that even the paper would be honest. The elven army went north, quietly, silently, just as it had come. Aldous went south. As a farewell, he stopped at the gates of Valford. He looked at the walls, at the citadel, at the people on the parapet. He said that whenever he ever wanted to know how a skinny village boy had learned to speak that way, Aric replied that he hadn't learned, that he simply spoke the truth. The truth requires no learning. Aldous smiled. Not a harsh smile, almost a warm one. He left. Mazareth was the last to leave. He stopped in front of Aric, looked at him through his black mirrors. He said he'd seen many summoners in his life. Long ago. Very long ago. They all went mad with power. They all used the rift as a weapon. They all perished. Aric is the first to use it to build, not to destroy. That is either wisdom or folly. Time will tell. And he left. Aric returned to Valford. It took 5 days to make the journey back with the council. Silent, tired, happy. 1,500 people met them at the gates. Someone had heard the news earlier. News travels faster than feet. The city was buzzing. People stood on the walls and on the rooftops and in the square. They watched the 5 of them.
Aric, Senna, Corin, Vesna, Pook on Corin's shoulder because he was tired of walking. Aric entered the gates. He stopped in the square. He looked around, the houses he had built, the walls he had summoned, the smithy that was smoking, the infirmary, Pook's workshop, the vegetable gardens, the fields beyond the wall, the children running between the adults' legs, ogres standing in the back row, peering over heads, goblins sitting on the rooftops, Lirin standing by the wall, smiling. They had all come here because they had been cast out, like trash, like the unwanted, like the surplus, and they had found a place, their place. He didn't give speeches. He just said 3 words. We've been accepted. Fists pounding on tables, on walls, on shields, on everything within reach. A rumble. Low. Powerful. The pounding of builders. In the evening,